Chapter 965. Okay. Luo Nan confirmed once more. He really lacked leadership and mobilization abilities. He simply didn't add to the mess and let them adjust and solve it themselves. Of course, the necessary experimental goals and training subjects had to be clear. Once you guys maintain this sandball, go over there. That's your final workstation. Luo Nan pointed in the direction of the lone deep blue walker exoskeleton armor by the seashore. You should all have experience controlling deep blue walkers. So the next step is to get that fellow to move. Shinha, you're the main control, but everything is in a formatted domain. It should be more outstanding than a single person controlling it. Bang 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 bang. It was unknown who shuddered, but another string of syncopators exploded. Luo Nan was already used to this. He just treated it as firecrackers. After thinking and calculating for a few seconds, he simply replenished the group, increasing the number of syncopators to 30. Feel the rhythm of the syncopators' operation. You can also try to segment them. Actually, you guys aren't used to it. You guys are too nervous. It was quite interesting to say that as the number of syncopators increased, the group of people felt that their tolerance for mistakes had increased. Their mental states clearly improved. It was unknown who started it, but they actually tried to get closer to the deep blue walkers by the seashore. Luo Nan didn't disturb them any further, but he turned to look at the syncopator reserves in his hand. They clearly didn't have many left. The second batch should be out. Send some more over. This time Luo Nan pointed at Meng Chong. Meng Chong was still in the middle of a heated discussion with the higher-ups and researchers of the order. He was shocked when he heard Luo Nan's words. He looked at the burners on the beach and the syncopators surrounding them. Only then did he understand. He stood up and responded. Meng Chong's communication with the order had not been cut off. Right now, he just needed to relay the matter. However, he felt the formatted domain erected on the beach and thought of Elder Mo Luan, whose corpse no longer remained. It was hard not to feel strange. Also, Meng Chong didn't forget that Luo Nan's experiment on Zeolite Beach was actually divided into different sections. The group of burners was just one of them. In contrast, Luo Nan was right here. From Meng Chong's perspective, Luo Nan was reminding him. Shinha and this group of military elites would adapt very quickly. If Luo Nan didn't make any progress when the time came, the Blood Flame Order would lose face. Meng Chong took a deep breath. He felt that the efficiency of simple communication was far from enough. These burners were tossing and turning back and forth, but Luo Nan was guiding them step by step. This was breaking the rules. I'll go right away. I'll be back soon. This time, Meng Chong not only needed to replenish the syncopator, but he also needed to call for help. Compared to the military, the Blood Flame Order's strength might not be enough, but in D-City, how could they not be able to form a team of 30 to 50 people? He remembered that Luo Nan's previous words had the meaning of the more the better. Meng Chong bowed towards Luo Nan and left in a hurry. His flying car had already become Luo Nan's experimental tool. Fortunately, this place was under the jurisdiction of Aber Manor. Running back didn't take much effort. Luo Nan could feel Meng Chong's sudden sense of urgency and competitiveness. He was happy to see this happen. He looked at the time again. It was almost 9:30. Time was ticking away. If he had to go out to sea in the afternoon to do an in-depth experiment, he would be pressed for time. Unfortunately, some things could not be rushed. Luo Nan pondered over what he should do when there was a gap. At the same time, Zhang Yingying, who was in charge of the mirror, silently leaned over and gave him a close-up. Hey, are the chestnuts ready? You just said that you need to give an example. You said you swallowed half of it. Don't you feel full after all this time? Oh, I almost forgot. Zhang Yingying wanted to give Luo Nan the camera, so she naturally had to follow him. It was impossible for her to take care of the burners' team-building activity. As for Shinha, he couldn't even take care of himself. How could he spare the energy to film? The camera position was completely random right now. There were only a few crooked close-up shots or scenes that flashed by quickly. Shinha's rigid first-person perspective was completely immersed in the scene, letting the entire world's audience feel his nervousness. There was nothing else aside from this. At this time, everyone could only rely on Zhang Yingying. But now, She must have done this on purpose. Right now, Zhang Yingying was enduring the curses of many regions of the world, but she also received the same amount of praise. Xia City's paper cut was already slapping his thigh in excitement. You should have done this a long time ago. Those burners are going to be used as equipment, not for class. Praise was like clouds in the group and in the circle. Zhang Yingying's eyes curved as she smiled. She took on the posture of a popular host and host. Come, Professor Luo. Let's take advantage of the time we have now to fulfill our promise. You have time, right? In the end, she still felt a bit guilty. Yeah, no problem. Luo Nan pondered for a second. Then he began to enter the main topic. Where was I just now? Give me an example. Give me the example of the random segmentation of the life layer. Oh, or the super configuration theory. Luo Nan nodded, continuing his previous train of thought. Yes, the segmentation and the super configuration theory. What I mean is that the most important thing to do in order to accept this theory is to do a good job in segmentation and reconstruction of the foundational components. Zhang Yingying automatically took the role of a supporting actor. She inserted an advertisement in passing. Do we need to use a syncopator? Of course it's good to be good at using tools, but just a syncopator isn't enough. We need to maintain a certain degree of objectivity. After all, it's hard to avoid a certain degree of deviation when we segment ourselves, especially when it comes to the mental plane. Then what should we do? We can consider a relatively objective environment for usage. We can consider a research method that leans more towards the application type. Luo Nan was neither impatient nor impatient. He spoke slowly and tirelessly. We know. I'm guessing that even if cultivation theory and civilization develop to an extremely high level in the future, the vast majority of people at the bottom and middle levels should still have their clairvoyance and sensing precision within the micrometer range when it comes to individual cultivation. It's impossible for them to touch upon the nanometer level and below in their individual cultivation experience, let alone drive and mobilize them. This is logical. But we all know that the gene is the material foundation of the inheritance of life. The diameter of a gene is usually only 2 nanometers. It will only be more difficult to segment the lower layer of the life substrate. In this way, segment to the lowest layer and carry out reconstruction is a correct line of nonsense. It will become a false proposition on the cultivation plane in reality. Zhang Yingying grunted twice. That's right, it's like this. But it seems like you're also talking nonsense right now. Do you have any hardheads? Luo Nan laughed. The most basic method is to invest a large amount of manpower and capital to carry out basic research. Cutting-edge instruments and high-level researchers are used to carry out real-time monitoring and research of the cultivation of living beings. There's no fear of failure. There's no fear of mistakes. There's no fear of starting over. Luo Nan was still smiling at the beginning, but his words gradually became more and more serious, especially the direction of logical reasoning. It corroborated with his memories of the relay station. The relevant scenes and fragments became more and more vivid. He vaguely saw Liang Lu standing in front of him with a solemn expression. Laws are laid out like a pass. Corpses are piled like mountains. It requires the correct direction of evolution, a perfect research system of genetic science, powerful social mobilization, and extremely bitter sacrifices, including lives and morals. No one is willing to pay such a great sacrifice. But this is necessary if one wants to cross the natural barrier of racial evolution. Luo Nan couldn't help but think of another person, Jim Master Xiao. There were some things that didn't need to be personally explained. Luo Nan's status rose, and the amount of information he received increased, allowing him to capture some traces. The person who stole heavenly fire. His mind gradually became absent-minded, so much so that he forgot whether or not he had truly reversed the words Liang Lu had told him. Where was I? Zhang Yingying rolled her eyes. You're talking about not being afraid of toppling over and starting anew. Luo Nan let out a long breath. In the end, he decided to temporarily swallow Liang Lu's words back into his stomach. He just made an approximate, relatively gentle restoration. Yes, not being afraid of toppling over and starting anew. Find a common cultivation method that conforms to the vast majority of people. Form an educational and research system that goes from general knowledge to specialization to higher levels of education and research. Endlessly expand the base, increase the number of samples, provide reference, and continue to improve. Stop. It was a pity that Zhang Yingying didn't have a microphone or any other handy gadgets at hand. She could directly poke Luo Nan's mouth. Let's talk a bit more practical. According to what you said, you're prepared to make everyone wait for a few hundred to 1,000 years? I'm being very practical. This work has actually already begun. Luo Nan spread his hands. The inner world has always been conducting related exploration and research. It's just that it's relatively scattered. Or perhaps it's better to say that they haven't found a relatively clear road mark. Comparatively speaking, Deep Blue is doing quite well. The direction is very clear, and the reference is very clear. It's just that they're a bit stingy in copying. Why do I feel like there's a hidden meaning behind your words? In short, you've only taken a few chestnuts. What gives you the right to summarize? Luo Nan had no choice but to change his words. What I mean is that from the looks of things, it's impossible for us to accomplish everything in one go. We need to reorganize the lowest levels of cultivation and form a completely error-free hierarchical system. We need to do this step by step. We need to start with the levels that we can basically control. First, we need to cut down as much as possible. Then, we use the interaction between high and low levels to push back with structural thinking. We need to solidify the hierarchical foundation. We need to use the direction and results of the leap as verification. We need to try and correct the mistakes and omissions of the past. We need to move forward one step at a time. Zhang Yingying muttered. Where did you learn these watertight *T excuses? Though Luo Nan said this, Zhang Yingying was able to roughly understand that Luo Nan's words were actually a highly generalized strategic direction. It was precisely because Luo Nan's generalization lacked quantitative and qualitative indicators that it sounded very general. Her Majesty Empress Wu would sometimes say something like this. Of course, Empress Wu was an extraordinary. She was a veteran power of the inner world. Even the generalization did not sound empty. In any case, one could fill in the blanks with one's imagination. As for Luo Nan, well, it seemed like he was pretty much the same right now. Chapter 966. Zhang Yingying rolled her eyes. She felt that she could not let this person be too mature and affect the results. She immediately twisted words and forced logic. It's still too abstract. Is there anything more practical? You said that the inner world is messing around. When did I? Didn't you? That's what you meant. Since you said it like that, aren't you going to take out a relatively clear road sign? Or do you want us to follow in the direction of Deep Blue? Luo Nan shook his head. There's no need for that. Look at the burner. It's extremely effective on the visible level. There shouldn't be too many problems if we extrapolate from this. The prospects are very broad. However, looking at the current form of realization, it's still just an illusory tinder. Illusory? Tinder? Human body modification is a path. It's a path that cannot be avoided. However, if we can't explore the genetic level and affect the life and death of the life solvent and the logic of inheritance, there will always be regrets. Then why don't you cut them up a bit? I think you're quite good at it. Zhang Yingying winked. She wished for the whole world to be in chaos. Unfortunately, I can't do it. Luo Nan spoke the truth. My methods are essentially illusory. They are still constructed on a conceptual model, and not on a solid foundation. Can you explain it a bit more clearly? What I mean is that I still use the reverse interference effect of soul strength on the fleshly body to build an ideal model for igniting the format of fire. If there comes a day or some extreme environment where soul strength is unable to be used, then this model will collapse and fall apart. Soul strength is unable to be used. Zhang Yingying was half on the mental side, but she had no experience in this area. She could only use her own knowledge to make guesses. Are you talking about the situation before the era of distortion, before the emergence of supernatural powers? Oh, that is a space-time environment worth researching, But I won't go that far. I'm just saying that a true tinder should be under the natural framework of life, form, and soul. It should go through a cultivation-style arrangement and automatically ignite a kind of qualitative change. Of course, it certainly requires a certain external space-time environment to catalyze it. Inside and outside interfere, complementing each other. The topic had flown into outer space. How could she bring it back? I'm waiting online. It's urgent. Actually, Zhang Yingying could see that every word that came out of Luo Nan's mouth seemed to be backed up by evidence. It was more like a description than a deduction. The problem is, what you see, Uncle Luo, is something that we mortals can't see. Zhang Yingying didn't know how to continue. Fortunately, Luo Nan took the initiative to change the direction. What I'm saying is just to express one thing. The things that I'm going to talk about next are all on the applied level. They won't touch upon fundamental theoretical research. I'm unable to talk about things that I don't know. Preface introduction. It's really long. Zhang Yingying couldn't hold back from ridiculing him. But she had to admit that after Luo Nan's lecture, basic research in the field of supernatural powers, especially the related directions, had increased quite a bit. Moreover, this guy definitely wasn't just saying whatever he wanted to say and hiding a script in his head. Trying to stir up trouble again? She had to continue playing the role of a supporting character. Alright, everyone understands. Today, Professor Luo will be lecturing on practical skills. Which aspect? Luo Nan flexed and extended 3 fingers in succession. Hierarchy, structure, and ascension. Without basic logic, it's impossible to talk about hierarchy and ascension. Then I can only talk about the middle part. He withdrew his index and middle fingers, leaving only his thumb. He wiggled it twice. Right now, we can talk about how to make a fuss about structure. We can try to segment supernatural powers. We can indirectly derive them. We can carry out self-perspective and analysis methods. Zhang Yingying's gaze swept over the strongest source of light on the beach. She blinked and had an innocent expression. Professor Luo, are you going to teach us how to segment burners? Before her voice even fell, powerful curses were unleashed from all over the world, even from many regions that exceeded this scope. Luo Nan laughed. Nope. Actually, I don't recommend starting with burners or the dynamo cores. It's not because they're bad, it's because they're too good. Zhang Yingying continued to act cute maliciously. I don't understand. Luo Nan was still gesturing with his thumb. Sister Yingying, do you know about the thumbless theory? Yeah, I think I've seen it somewhere before. Luo Nan spoke neither too fast nor too slow. He had been teaching for over half a year, and his experience had grown richer and richer. He had gradually forgotten what stage fright was. This is a metaphor put forth at the end of the last century. It is said that in the process of human evolution and development, nimble hands played an extremely crucial role. The evolution of the thumb brought about a stable grasping ability, and it possessed a decisive power. However, in the current stage of human evolution, let alone the thumb, even the hands aren't that important anymore. But in that special stage, without the evolution of the thumb function, can the hairless monkeys humans really obtain their current accomplishments? A more typical example is the scaffolding outside a building when it's built using traditional methods. When the project is finally completed, the only thing people see is the skyscraper. Who would care about those steel pipes and bamboo strips? It seems like we don't really use them now. But in the last century, the century before that, without those steel pipes and bamboo strips, how could we talk about high-rise buildings? This saying is still valid in the field of supernatural power research. When we face a highly integrated result, we only know that it is necessary, but we are often unable to find its sufficient and necessary conditions. This is because the once important but now useless link has been hidden away. It has even been streamlined. We can only see high-level reality, but we can't see low-level history. We are even more unable to see the underlying structure and order within the evolution of history. So from this angle, the standard array the configuration of the dynamo core, is too high-end. It's too streamlined. It's not suitable. It seemed to make a lot of sense. Zhang Yingying was convinced by Luo Nan. She followed his train of thought. Then what's better? How about the more basic condensation ring? Last time you... Luo Nan coughed again. In a certain sense, it's more condensed than the dynamo core. Zhang Yingying blinked. Did I accidentally screw the boss over? Then let's use the blood intent ring fortress. The blood intent ring. You forged it yourself. There's no problem with that. Luo Nan still shook his head. The structure of the fortress has a certain degree of integration. It's the product of an extremely high-level configuration thinking, and it leans toward the mental plane. But then again, this is a very good group order structure. Though it's forged from soul strength, the subjective thoughts are nearly chaotic after taking shape. It embodies the objective order of the mental plane. It's very rare. You can try it yourself on the mental side. Use the syncopator to do a few rounds of segmentation. It should be beneficial for grasping the logic and state of the birth and death of soul strength. Zhang Yingying patiently waited for him to finish his advertisement. Only then did she retort. You can't do this, you can't do that. You need to find an angle to cut in, right? Luo Nan's gaze spun around the beach and the mist of the sea. In the end, he pointed at the camera. If you want to talk about a more suitable one, then let's continue using Brother Papercut as an example. Papercut's excited mood was no longer there after Professor Luo flipped him over again. His chest let out a thump, and he felt all sorts of mixed emotions. It was very complicated. Di Weiwu patted Papercut's shoulder and sighed. I don't know if this is a good thing or not. Get the hell out of here, you little brat. Yes, Papercut was able to discern the main meaning of this curse. Nervous. Really nervous. Professor Luo, Luo Yuan, please be lenient with your words. Papercut wanted to send a private message to beg for mercy, but in the end, he was too embarrassed to do so. Luo Nan, who was thousands of kilometers away, continued to speak in a logical manner. Remember what I said before? Brother Papercut divided soul activation into two schools. The control school and the activation school. Looking at the current mainstream of cultivation, no matter how exquisite the control, it is bound to be limited by sensing ability. Its precision is limited. It is also affected by one's cognitive level. Its potential is also limited. 1 is 1. 2 is 2. Don't even mention the limitations of equipment. Brother Papercut gave me an arm guard in the past. It corresponds to precise control. It is very exquisite, but I have never used it. Luo Nan laughed as he spoke. He faced the camera and made an apologetic gesture. Next to Papercut, Di Weiwu giggled foolishly. But when he saw Papercut's twitching face, he stuck out his tongue and hurriedly closed his mouth. Actually, the path of simulating spirituality has great potential as long as I change my train of thought a bit and transform it with super configuration theory. It is worth researching. Today, I'll focus on this. Di Weiwu endured for a second, but he finally broke through. He reached out and poked Papercut's fat waist. Uncle Papercut, Brother Nan says that you have great potential. Papercut still didn't speak. Only his breathing became much heavier. His eyes were wide open as he stared unwaveringly at the projection screen. However, Luo Nan didn't enter the main topic. He just gave a simple introduction to the foundation of the super configuration theory. It was how all things were divided into 3 levels. The material level, the life level, and the fantasy level. Within these 3 levels, the most basic material level is mainly the accumulation, nesting, and action of objective matter. It acts within the nonlinear natural chaos to give birth to life. It is the cornerstone of the level, and it is also the most common reaction environment. The highest end fantasy level has limitless upper limits. As far as I understand it, it is mainly thought and connection. With human thought as the benchmark, one's thoughts are connected to 10,000 miles. One's thoughts are beyond the heavens. This allows 2 completely unrelated things to interact with each other in accordance with the dual order of nature and the thinking of life. It represents the framework, the regulations, and the extension of order. As for the middle life level, it acts as the hub. It leads up and connects down. The most important thing is the structure. It needs to embody the unity of contradictions. It is used to support the nonlinear natural chaos and the thinking of life with a high level of order. It also needs to embody the general direction of life: birth, growth, death, and destruction. Zhang Yingying promptly interrupted him. Speak human language. Speak human language. Luo Nan was very innocent. There are people who like to hear it. We need to think for the majority of people. And didn't you want to talk about application? Why are you talking about theory? I need to talk about the general sequence of events. The next demonstration is to demonstrate the structural deduction and changes of the middle life level based on the general trend of the three major levels. I feel that this is the direction of application of soul activation with great potential. Luo Nan rolled up his sleeves in all seriousness. Zhang Yingying didn't think much of it at first, but her eyelids twitched when she came back to her senses. You're just a mass of water vapor. Aren't you afraid of being seen through and humiliated by playing this sort of operation? Oh, it seems like there's nothing to be afraid of. Luo Nan's movements were rather calm and natural. Right now he really was like a magician about to perform. He extended his hand and stroked the sand beneath his feet. Next, we'll use the logic from before on the sand table of the material level to demonstrate a few structural combinations. I'm doing my best to follow the nature of the life level. The theory I'm referring to can be simply called fantasy configuration. The basic operation and interference methods come from the techniques Brother Papercut taught me. Of course, I'll have to use the logic of fantasy configuration to edit it a bit. You don't mind, right? I don't mind. Zhang Yingying answered extremely straightforwardly. It was Luo Nan's turn to roll his eyes. I'm asking Brother Papercut. I'm waiting for a private message. Luo Nan's voice had yet to fall when Papercut's confirmation arrived at the same time as Zhang Yingying's low sweep of her leg. So fast. It seems like it's still early in the morning over at Xia City. Hee, it's because of you that their nest exploded. But then again, aren't we the lucky ones? Zhang Yingying very maliciously changed the scene, giving a short shot of the 7 burners on the beach not too far away. Between them was the sandball. It was so flat and bumpy that no regular shape could be seen. The sandball represented a nervous process of adaptation. It formed a stark contrast with the casual and natural conversation over here. Luo Nan chuckled. He didn't say much. Then, he truly began his demonstration and explanation. Right now, I'm going to use the blessing of soul strength to give this material sand table an initial condition. It doesn't matter if the individuals on it are alive or not. They must have a foundation of mutual induction and interaction. This is also the starting stance and basic principle of soul activation: sufficient multi-angle and multi-level interference. Luo Nan's gaze moved downward as he spoke, and Zhang Yingying's camera followed closely. A portion of the beach by his feet suddenly darkened in color. It appeared to be a bit moist. At first glance, it looked like a bottle of water had been poured over it. A second later, the moist sand began to boil. At first glance, the sand under the camera looked like a pot of corn soup that wasn't too well colored. Because of the density of the sand, it had an extremely eye-catching viscous feeling. But then, Zhang Yingying gave a close-up shot. Everyone immediately saw that every grain of sand in this pot of viscous soup was actually relatively dry. They weren't stuck by the soup, and there was very little contact between them. This pot of sand felt more like iron sand under the action of a magnet. It was magnetized within a magnetic field, attracting and repelling each other. And when the force used exceeded a certain threshold, the sand would push against each other and gush upwards, forming an extremely tensile bubble. Soon, the bubble would burst open, returning to the lower layer, and the cycle would repeat. Zhang Yingying felt dizzy the more she watched. She couldn't help but ask, why is it like this? What are they doing? That's a very good question. Luo Nan was already standing to the side, watching with folded arms. The truth is that they're doing things to each other. Chapter 967. Luo Nan stuck a polite tail under Zhang Yingying's offensive of rolling her eyes. Then he continued to explain. The reason for this phenomenon is because I use my soul strength to bestow them with a basic and identical reaction pattern. Let me explain the logic behind this. We ultimately want to simulate the nature of the life layer, so we will make it relatively complex. However, it will be crude and random. After all, I don't know what the sand will look like after it evolves into the life solvent. I can only fabricate it out of thin air. Therefore, the structure of the blessing will be a bit abstract and conceptual. The structure embodies the focus on the reaction acuity of the individual. It increases the viscosity of the interference between them, giving them ample opportunities to react. It's a bit similar to magnets. Two forces of attraction and repulsion will form as their spatial state changes. The basic structure is like this. Luonan condensed water vapor as he spoke, drawing a concrete diagram in the air. The rules were unfamiliar. It was clearly the product of configuration thinking. It made the scalp of an outsider swell. Luonan gave it a qualitative description. This is the basic unit that we are able to divide into. Zhang Yingying mumbled, "This isn't friendly. Do you need to make it so professional?" Luonan glanced at her. "There's no other way. Back then, Brother Papercut gave me the material condition of a talisman paper process by Master Gao. It is active and has a stronger direction. What I have here is sand, so I need to do some processing in advance. Let me emphasize again, I did this rather casually. I randomly chose a reaction structure of a miniature individual and gave it a boost. This was artificially designed for the convenience of the experiment. In real life, the result of the segmentation wouldn't be so neat." Wow. Diweiwu's eyes went perfectly round. He gasped in surprise. "Uncle Papercut, so that little paper man of yours is actually this complicated." "Excuse me." Papercut's words were so true that they made him cry. Luonan's method was indeed carried out according to the basic principle of soul activation. It was to interfere as much as possible with this basic logic. Back then, the Xia City branch had sent him to teach Luonan this technique, because they valued it as a typical example of the interference between the mental and the material. However, normal ability users, including Papercut, would never be able to be like Luonan, giving every grain of sand a basic reaction pattern, no matter how meticulous they were. This was equivalent to making thousands of blessings in an instant. Even if it was simple and repeated in batches, when accumulated to a certain number, the difficulty would naturally rise to an insurmountable level. Papercut was quite self-aware. Even if he sent 10 or 100 people like him, it would be impossible for him to reach Luonan's level. Luonan, who was thousands of kilometers away, seemed to sense Papercut's state of mind. He faced the camera and spoke in a gentle tone. "Under the logic of soul activation, we need to do our best to provide an adequate and necessary environment. Then we will bestow the environment with regulations, and the logic of sensing changes. However, this is only research. It is screening. It is a deliberately created ideal state. Even so, he might have to conduct tens of thousands of simulations before he could seek a probabilistic result. In actual combat, we definitely have to choose the simplest and most effective structure. Of course, this is within the limits of the target's own physical properties. All of this will require the accumulation of daily experiments." Luonan was trying to comfort her. But why did it make people want to cry even more? Papercut thought about his daily life. The handicraft shop he ran and the gaudy display cabinets for papercut craftsmanship. His entire person didn't feel good. Luonan turned to Zhang Yingying in the live broadcast. "What do you want?" Zhang Yingying was still in a dizzy state. She was stunned for half a second before waking up. I choose. Can I choose? I told you. I just gave them a basic reaction structure, giving them basic activity. As manipulators, we still need to bestow them with a few regulations. We need to give them a corresponding stimulation. It's like doing breeding experiments. We need to see how resistant the flora is to certain drugs. Now that you say it like this, I suddenly understand a bit. Zhang Yingying was a smart person. She had listened to Luonan's explanations and introductions several times before. She was immediately enlightened by a few specific examples. "You're doing bacteria screening. More or less. It's just that we're screening superconfigurations that are built upon the foundation of tangible matter. It's a kind of incorporeal system framework." Are we looking to see who is more efficient? Well, you mean to say that we should make them a whole system, sand creatures? Yes, that's what I mean, but it's just a simulation. Simulation? You want me to be a game designer? Let me think about it. Zhang Yingying lowered her head to look at the beach. Speaking of which, the quality of the sand on Zeolite Beach was excellent. It was fine and pure. It was only when piled together that it revealed a faint golden luster. The feeling of stepping on it with bare feet should be quite good. Unfortunately, none of the people present had the leisure to do so. Zhang Yingying muttered to herself irresolutely. She simply crouched down and grabbed a handful of fine sand that hadn't received any interference from the outside of the boiling sand soup. She let it flow through the gaps between her fingers. Gradually, she got the feeling. It's a bit soft, but it's quite malleable. Maybe we need a fellow that can transform? Oh, we need to increase its stickiness and malleability. Luonen casually gestured in the air. He wasn't just messing around. He was making additions, deletions, and corrections based on the simple configuration of the condensation of water vapor. Illusory yet clear lines and diagrams condensed and danced on his fingertips. Don't follow his train of thought by all means. You'll die. Zhang Yingying squinted her eyes and looked a few times. Then she forced herself to return to being the client. She wholeheartedly raised her request. Don't think about hardness. But we can do a bit of work on the unloading force. Luonen expressed his understanding. It's conductive. When necessary, it can dissipate and reassemble for a short period of time. What about the attack power? Are we going to pounce over and suffocate people to death? This can't be considered for now. The conversation on the beach continued. The style of the scene looked quite normal. However, there were a few people who were forced to watch from all over the world who resented injustice. Their emotions were provoked to become increasingly irritable and fragile. This adulterous couple. Another person slammed the table in the video conference setting. There was also a person complaining on the other side. That Shershinha. Did they let him do the experiment? And Hood. Didn't he know how to give a word of warning? Such a crucial camera position is wasted just like that. Of course, there was no lack of poisonous tongues among the participants. Their poisonous tongues grew stronger in their leisure time. Even if we keep it normal, gentlemen, are you sure that the normal level of your brain matches the scene of the live broadcast? The video conference nearly turned into a battle of wills. In the end, there were still some people, such as Bald Jeff and Director Mao, who grew more and more interested the more they watched. Right now, the main focus of the live broadcast was on Luonan. It could be seen that as Zhang Yingying's request became more and more specific, Luonan's water vapor configuration became more and more complex. But when the composition structure reached a certain degree of complexity, Luonan would begin to subtract. He would be stingy here and subtract there. After a few rounds, he would reach a relatively concise degree. Then he would begin to add layers upon layers. This is a type of optimization method. It's an extremely high-level operation. Bald Jeff made an assertion. There must be some sort of formula in the depths of his heart. It doesn't matter if it's symbolic or purely graphical. It can follow a fixed rule to offset the redundant parts and transform them. The accumulated structure can be upgraded and transformed. This is a high level of integration. A high level of evolution of knowledge. Director Mao still liked to converse with professionals. He let his secretary refill his cup of coffee, but his eyes never left the live broadcast from beginning to end. Can you see the theoretical context? Is there a concrete basis? Bald Jeff could only shrug. Perhaps Instructor Li Wei can provide a better explanation. However, did you discover anything else? It's just a guess. I feel that Luonen shouldn't have been exposed to it for too long. Look at him. He was a bit hesitant at first. He wasn't proficient in using it. But the more he practiced, the more fluent he became. This is the accumulation of skill proficiency. It's not something that can be explained by a so-called genius. In other words, he certainly has something to rely on. There's no need to mention the last sentence of nonsense. Director Mao swirled the cup of coffee that was half full, letting the thick black liquid imitate the small piece of boiling beach. But in the end, he didn't get any results from the swirling. In the end, he could only sigh. What a pity. There's no way to cut open his head for now. Luonen didn't know that there was a certain big shot extraordinary who was extremely interested in his head right now. Moreover, this wasn't really news. He made a series of calculations with full concentration. Only after 3 or 4 rounds of calculations was he barely satisfied. Right now, the condensation of the water vapor into a configuration was more or less unrecognizable. Luonan's gaze rotated back and forth between the configuration and the sand. It seemed that he was considering how to proceed. In the end, he said to Zhang Yingying, "You're up next." Me. In the end, they aren't living things. They're simulated spirituality. They don't have any power of their own. So they need the support of external energy. Plus, I still need to maintain a bit of objectivity as much as possible. Zhang Yingying blinked her eyes. She was a bit eager to give it a try, but she was still worried. Can I do it? Isn't this operation a bit too meticulous? Relax. The framework is set up. You're just a human-shaped battery. Zhang Yingying gave Luonan the middle finger outside of the camera, but she still obediently followed Luonan's instructions. Step by step, she carefully took over the control. During this time, Luonan gave the sand a second round of support. He made adjustments to their initial reaction framework. Every time he carried out a fine adjustment, he would list the relevant configuration changes in the air in the form of condensation of water vapor. Okay, there weren't many people who could understand this, but the attitude was there, right? At the same time, he encouraged Zhang Yingying. Don't be nervous. I told you that they already have a set pattern. You don't need to expend any effort at all. You just need to maintain a stable output of energy. Oh, you can even experience it up close. Zhang Yingying exclaimed in the next second. Wow! Chapter 968. Zhang Yingying's facial expression wasn't shown in the live broadcast, but the curiosity of nearly everyone in the audience turned into cat claws as she cried out. They stuck out from their throats, digging into their throats. Luckily, there were a few people who could probe at close range. The group of friends were all clamoring. Hurry, hurry, hurry. Tell me, what does it feel like? Zhang Yingying's eyes were closed. Unfortunately, the camera wasn't pointed at her. It was just focused on the sand that was still in a boiling state, as well as the slender white fingers that were suspended above the boiling sand pit. Right now, the fingers were faintly trembling and moving. It was as if they were lightly stroking something. It seems alive. It's very coarse. It looks like it has fluff. What? What is this? Papercut began to doubt life. His scalp was splitting. Di Weiwu was incessantly annoying him to the side. Uncle Paper, what is Sister Yingying saying? Why don't you take out a paper man, and let me give it a try? There were also some people suspected that Zhang Yingying was doing this on purpose. She was exaggerating, singing a two-man show with Luonan. However, the two people in the live broadcast didn't pay attention to these things. Luonan had a very amazed appearance. Your senses are quite exquisite. Your support is quite strong as well. The characteristics of this ability are very suitable for nurturing. Speaking of which, you should partner with Brother Papercut to make a petri dish or something. How did you derive the ability White Rainbow? Most of Zhang Yingying's mind was in the sand pit under her hand. It went in one ear and out the other. She only became more excited. Hurry, hurry, hurry. Tell me what to do next. Oh, let me adjust it a bit. I'll do my best to fit the characteristics of your ability. TSK, the effect will exceed expectations. The sand in the sand pit was already converging as Luonan spoke. It was no longer the cyclic and inflating bubbles. Instead, it formed an undulating mucus membrane. Truthfully speaking, the appearance of the sand pit was ugly. It lacked beauty. But Zhang Yingying's specific senses told her that there was another situation. The innumerable grains of sand still maintained their basic absorption and repulsion powers. But in a more complex reaction mode, some of them began to cluster and accumulate layer by layer, separating themselves from the other sand particles in the sandpit and forming a separate entity. Zhang Yingying's perceptual penetration was blocked by these clumped sand accumulations. Actually, it was not blocking, but the overall activity pattern of the aggregated sand had already derived extremely complicated details. It was so complicated that Zhang Yingying could not grasp it at all. She could only observe a general behavior pattern. How interesting! Zhang Yingying had already begun to discover a considerable amount of interest. It was as if she was playing some kind of nurturing or management game. In fact, there were indeed such works on the market. But when this model was brought into reality and touched with a more realistic and comprehensive perception, every moment seemed to have a breathtaking change in the details. The more sensitive one's perception was, the more inconceivable stimuli one could gather. Zhang Yingying devoted all her attention to it. No matter what, she wanted to know to what extent this pile of sand that had just taken shape would develop. Yes, let's give it a name. Let's call it Sand Demon Number 1. Oh, okay. Luo Nan simply responded. Nexi. A powerful disintegrative force descended from the sky, causing Sand Demon Number 1 in the sandpit to disintegrate in an instant, returning it to its original state. The several centometers that descended with the disintegrative force also completed their mission. They flew up once more, revolving around the sandpit and humming. Sigma, O_O winky face. What are you doing? Zhang Yingying was really frightened. She was stupefied there for at least 3 seconds. She stared at Luo Nan with wide eyes when she understood what had happened. Her voice rose by a notch. Centometers and cheating. Huh. Zhang Yingying really could not imagine that Luo Nan could speak of this matter in such a righteous and confident manner. Luo Nan was indeed righteous and confident. He began to record the configuration state of Sand Demon Number 1. He condensed it into a state of water vapor and let it float in the atmosphere. Then he wrote down the composition and structure of the centometers as they displayed their effects, including the direction and techniques of soul strength interference. Since Luo Nan lacked a concise symbol system, he could only make intuitive descriptions that were similar to geometry. Therefore, the writing on the blackboard took up a lot of space. Soon, it occupied a considerable area. The entire set was quite taxing on the eyes of the audience. But for ability users who lacked the concept of centometers, this was clearly a rather intuitive user manual. At the very least, it was like that. The human brain would always produce a few adorable illusions. Some people would think, right now, I'm just missing a set of centometers. Luo Nan did not explain too much about how to use the centometers. Right now, his main direction of work was within the sandpit. Yes, at the same time, he needed to appease the human battery. I said before that we need to simulate the nature of the living layer. But if you think about it, you know that there's no way to make this sand evolve into a true living substance. For example, to create silicon-based life and the like. Therefore, it's just a simulation. In the beginning and end conditions, we'll artificially choose the corresponding characteristics and strengthen them. In this way, its foundation is still illusory. We can only do our best to make it a bit more stable at the higher levels. So what? Zhang Yingying was still brooding over the sudden death of Sand Demon Number 1. You just need to continue simulating it. The problem is that we don't have time. Right now, it's just a demonstration. It's not a real experiment. We need to take care of the effects of the demonstration. Zhang Yingying clicked her tongue twice. Who are you mocking when you say these words? Luo Nan spread his hands. What I mean is this. Fast-forwarding, in other words, cheating is inevitable. This is because I already know that there are some super configurations or system frameworks that are more effective than the one just now. It's just that our luck isn't good. We didn't encounter the probabilistic result during the natural combination process of the sand. We could only start over. Perhaps this is a bit more humane than watching them naturally collapse after accumulating layer upon layer. Or perhaps, do we need to demonstrate the natural collapse situation? Zhang Yingying was a bit startled, but she didn't say anything in the end. She just pursed her lips and became an emotionless human battery. Oh, Petri dish might sound a bit better? Regardless of whether or not Zhang Yingying got over it, Luo Nan really did pay attention. In the end, He demonstrated the natural collapse situation once. It was a relatively long and tedious process. The tens of thousands of sand particles within the sandpit were attracted or repelled by the squeezed mass of sand particles. They adjusted their body angles over and over again, gradually forming pieces of glued bodies. The glued bodies began to interact with each other, colliding, and even devouring each other. It was like a chaotic battle between many nations. They were no longer satisfied with the space limitations of the sandpit. They began to expand to the outer regions. The ordinary sand particles, which originally didn't possess the support of the configuration, were drawn into the chaotic battle between the nations to strengthen their respective strengths. However, maybe because the excessive amount of normal sand diluted the power of the configuration enhancement, or maybe because there was a bug in the internal system structure. When the pot of boiling sand was about to be unified and Sand Demon number 2 was about to appear, the devastating collapse came like a sudden plague. Zhang Yingying was stupefied as she watched the sand particles rapidly lose all vitality and completely collapse. She subconsciously raised her hands. I didn't do anything. I didn't do anything wrong. We can prove it to each other. The problem lies in the fact that the sand made too many wrong choices. Do you understand now? Zhang Yingying directly changed the topic. She gave him a sideways glance. Can you have a little bit of self-awareness? How many people can understand the lesson you're teaching? Oh really? Let fate decide. Luo Nan laughed, his eyes squinting. Zhang Yingying was a bit startled, but she didn't say anything in the end. Luo Nan didn't talk much during the relatively long and tedious demonstration of natural collapse, but he wasn't idle. He was constantly observing the sandpit, the restless accumulation of sand particles. He was constantly recording and updating the meaningful system framework formed from tens of thousands of random combinations of simple configurations. The surrounding area where he stood was a beach where fog and seawater intersected. It was practically covered in diagrams formed from condensed water vapor. They were affected by the refraction of light. They were faint to the point of being non-existent. Sometimes they were extremely dazzling. Zhang Yingying didn't even dare to rashly move her position right now. Otherwise, she might destroy the writing on the blackboard next to her. Luo Nan wasn't just a recorder. He would give a simple explanation every time the recording was updated. He let the people watching the live broadcast know what kind of turning point the ecology of the sandpit was at. Sometimes he would even give a simple explanation of the corresponding structure. He would explain its advantages and disadvantages, as well as the possible direction of further transformation. This demonstration of natural collapse lasted for nearly an hour. It was longer than all of the previous live broadcasts combined. However, the reactions of the audience watching the live broadcast were quite good. Many people watched with keen interest. It was hard to imagine that ordinary sand could form such an interesting and coordinated performance after a simple reaction mode was set up. Most importantly, many people were able to see configuration content that was 10 times, 100 times richer than what they had accumulated in the first half of their lives. There was also the relevant knowledge of segmentation and combination. It must be known that ever since Professor Luo's public lecture half a year ago, configuration theory had become the most popular theories in the inner world along with the cage theory on the mental plane. Compared to the cage theory, configuration theory was only publicly known in 3 domains that could be researched on a large scale: the burner, the condensation ring, and the blood intent ring. The scope of research was quite narrow. There were also people who tried to extract configurations from their own cultivation experiences to conduct research, but most of them were unsuccessful. But today Luo Nan was simply selling his configurations on a but sale. Even if it was a framework structure that was destined to fail, and the vast majority of configurations had flaws of one sort or another, there would always be a bit of a marvelous and resplendent flash of light. As for which was the true flash of light, that was up to the individual to decide. Chapter 969. After comforting Zhang Yingying, after the experimental proof of natural collapse, the cheating demonstration experiment began again, and the progress of the experiment was suddenly accelerated. Correspondingly, The configurations displayed and the grander framework structures became more and more abundant, and they were replaced more and more frequently. A portion of people gnashed their teeth in anger when faced with such a large amount of information. A portion of people were infatuated and intoxicated. A portion of people were secretly delighted. But in the eyes of a few people, to be clear, in Zhang Yingying's eyes, Luo Nan looked a bit darkened. Luo Nan, who had entered an experimental state, was like a callous creator. He mobilized the countless possibilities of the fine sand community, nurturing it into a nearly living reaction. But then he extinguished it one by one like he was strangling an ant. He only kept a few possible branches and let them go again, causing the vitality in the sandpit to appear again. When it reached a certain level, he wiped it out again. He repeated the cycle again and again, strengthening and inheriting the configuration framework he needed. Well, Zhang Yingying knew that this was a very normal artificial selection of experimental pathways, and it was widely used in many scientific research fields. And Luo Nan's operation was extremely calm, precise, and on point from start to finish. There was absolutely no excessive behavior that violated scientific ethics. But she was a petri dish. All the products that simulated spirituality appeared in the sandpit. Even if they were temporary, shouldn't she put in effort and emotion? There were times when reason was not worth mentioning in front of emotions. Zhang Yingying endured round after round. In the end, she really could not hold it in any longer, and began to quarrel with Luo Nan. It was one-sided. That's enough. I think this is good enough. Still not enough? You've already destroyed 30 rounds. Don't you have an answer? Can't we just copy him in the first round? Hey, are you listening to my opinion? This is too much. Utensils. I'm not playing with you anymore. Luo Nan jabbed down with an extremely callous finger just as his voice fell. Sand Goblin number 33 within the sandpit was just like its many predecessors. It suffered a calamity of total annihilation. It nearly swelled to the point of bursting out of the sandpit before collapsing and disintegrating. Zhang Yingying was so angry that she leaned back. She wished she could jump up and choke Luo Nan's neck. Maybe I can bear with it a little longer? At this moment, a buzzing sound lingered in his ears. The centometers rose into the air again as usual and stared coldly at the life embers in the sand pit. Luo Nan was like this as well. But his line of sight drifted away half a second later. It seemed to be looking at the writing on the blackboard he had left behind earlier. It also seemed to be piercing through the moisture in the air, to point towards the misty ocean. But soon he turned his gaze back and smiled at Zhang Yingying. That's enough. Ah. Zhang Yingying was stunned. When she looked into the sandpit again, she saw that the sand that had just collapsed began to squirm strangely. Yes, squirming. It was impossible for a single grain of sand that had already disintegrated to display such a state. The reason for such a visual effect could only mean that there was an invisible network between the grains of sand that was connected in succession and conducted successively. Due to the existence of this invisible vein, Zhang Yingying very naturally ignored the common gaps between the sand grains, and regarded the existence in the sand pit as one from the looks of things. It seemed that the sand had been broken up into 5, 6, 7, 8 pieces. The amplitude and frequency of the squirming of each piece was a bit different. Was it affected by the size of the split? But once these split pieces came together, the slight difference disappeared. In the time it took to take 3 to 5 breaths, there was only one frequency left in the sand pit. One pattern. It squirmed, twisted, and occasionally rolled. It slowly gathered together, drawing a boundary with the inactive sand at the edge of the sand pit. It looked like a somewhat lively fat snake. Well, it was also like seawater that flowed along a hidden channel on the beach. It wrapped around the grains of sand, and followed a fine trench that was invisible to the naked eye. It gradually crossed the boundary of the sand pit, and flowed in a meandering fashion on the even more expansive beach. Zhang Yingying's breathing became shallow. Her gaze followed the pile of sand on the beach for a long time. It seemed that even her breathing would become one with its squirming frequency. Sand Demon number 33. Luo Nan recorded the relevant configuration frame in the air as he answered. It can be considered a creation that conforms to the experimental goal. Basically, conforms to the goal? What's the goal? Zhang Yingying had long since become muddle-headed from the large amount of information and the inexplicable emotions. Right now, she could only painstakingly recall and demonstrate the preset regulations before carrying out the experiment. Viscosity, plasticity, conductivity, as well as the mechanism of temporary decomposition and remodeling during high-risk times. Luo Nen casually reminded her. He wrote more and more on the blackboard at this time. Many of the special configuration features required large amounts of schematic conversion in order to be realized, and the condensed water vapor patterns floating around him were far too dense. In the end, he simply blew out a mouthful of air to clear the area around him. Only then was he able to continue. Holy crap! He really wiped. Don't. I haven't finished watching yet. Screenshot party laughs but doesn't speak. Ripoff party gently caresses the dog's head. Retard kneels. Great God, please link. The link is here. Double-click to like it, dear. Luo Nan's excessively casual actions created a chain of chaos in the many cyberspaces of the world. Well, the blackboard writing on the beach really was becoming more and more chaotic. Large amounts of diagrams were recorded. They floated in the air in the form of condensed water vapor. Their structures could be considered stable, but they were far too light. A gust of sea breeze could blow them away. So much so that a considerable portion had already left the camera. Some were even submerged in the pervasive mist of the seaside. This made those configuration researchers who truly wanted to learn beat their chests and stomp their feet. But before they had the time to howl in grief, Luo Nan's follow-up writings and explanations arrived. The seemingly concise yet extremely complex diagrams and the corresponding conversion and deduction process were like a soul-sucking monster. They firmly hooked their attention, finding it hard to loosen their focus even a bit. Luo Nan mainly explained Sand Demon number 33's basic regulations. Based on the characteristics of the sand, he added secondary regulations to it through a configuration method. These were the things he warned Zhang Yingying about. All these regulations cannot be created out of thin air. They must be derived and extended according to the physical properties of the sand. The substrate is sand, and this is how it is. Changing the substrate requires a change in appearance. That is, the forces on the material plane are magnified in terms of the configuration concept. They accumulate layer by layer, ultimately establishing a passage from the material plane to the imaginary plane. Of course, this passage is hidden. A certain accumulation of conditions must be met before it can be opened. There must also be some margin for self-adjustment. This is a kind of regulation that imitates the laws of nature. It is also a display mode of mutual interference. It can be considered a key point related to the design. Luo Nan's explanation was quite on point under the layer upon layer of freshness. It caused a considerable portion of the live broadcast audience to be unable to extricate themselves. Even if they didn't understand, they could still feel that they had gained a great deal, right? But Zhang Yingying, who was close at hand, basically treated it as nothing. Most of her attention was focused on the body of Sand Demon number 33. This creation, which she didn't know how to accurately define, crawled out of the sandpit and did a stretch of movement. It appeared to be a bit hesitant. Zhang Yingying was hesitating as well. Her camera lens swayed back and forth between Luo Nan and Sand Demon number 33. This caused the minds of the live broadcast audience to be torn apart once more. A portion of the impatient people who preferred the material existence had already begun to curse. What the hell are you talking about? Give me a close-up view. Is that thing alive? I don't understand a thing at all. I just want to see a sand sculpture. Oh no, I want to see a sand demon. Of course, the longer one looked, the more one would discover. Sand Demon number 33 lived up to expectations. The more focused the camera was, the more obvious the range of its movements became. It quickly passed its hesitation period at a location a bit far away from the edge of the sandpit. It began to crawl back. Or was it flowing? It was really hard to use an existing framework to describe Sand Demon number 33's mode of movement. However, this didn't affect its movement at all. At first, Zhang Yingying believed that this fellow would display a certain fondness towards its birthplace, the sandpit. But reality proved that this wasn't the case. At the edge of the sandpit, sand demon number 33 would sometimes crawl and flow in a large range. A portion of its body would slide down the irregular edge of the sandpit. However, it would soon increase the frequency of its wriggling, driving its entire body to accelerate and escape. It seemed to be a bit repulsive, but it continued to move along the edge of the sandpit. It had nearly made a small circle in a few breaths of time. Yes, it was heading towards Zhang Yingying. Even as an energy provider, Zhang Yingying was constantly monitoring sand demon number 33. But when this fellow passed by her, she still subconsciously extended her hand to touch it to get a more realistic tactile experience. She did touch it. Unexpectedly, it was a little cool and smoother than she imagined. The first feeling she got was not the coarse feeling of sand piled up. Most importantly, when she extended her finger over and made contact with sand demon number 33, half a second later, the latter's flowing body clearly caved in and deformed to avoid her touch. Oh, Zhang Yingying let out a short gasp. Even she didn't quite understand the tactile sensation at that moment, and how it felt. Zhang Yingying didn't do anything else. Just like that, sand demon number 33 flowed under her finger, and successfully circled around the sandpit. It headed towards the front of the beach where the waves were crashing against it. Zhang Yingying was stunned for a few seconds before she zoomed in on her finger. She could see that there were only a few grains of fine sand stuck to her finger. It looked like the new sand that sand demon number 33 had stuck to it as it crawled and flowed. It was because of Zhang Yingying's actions that more and more people came to a realization. They grasped a plausible line of logic. Zhang Yingying was Luo Nan's designated energy provider. She was the direct controller. The controller possessed the right to control. Sand demon number 33 didn't seem to be obedient. The conclusion was, the strange existence on the beach seemed to be an uncontrollable automaton. This was terrifying. Of course, the holes in people's imaginations were even more terrifying. Oh my God! This thing has its own consciousness? It's alive! Is it really creating life? Chapter 970. Creating life? Clearly, that shouldn't be the case. Zhang Yingying knew very well that sand demon number 33, who was currently crawling on the beach, didn't have any power of its own. All of its energy source was provided by Zhang Yingying. However, after being electrified, this unique existence, not only did it appear to be autonomous on the outside, but its internal structure also clearly possessed a kind of cohesive gravitational force. One could even say that it was vitality. It was like the instinctive suction and desire of life, constantly seeking for more energy to support itself. Zhang Yingying unconsciously gave more energy. Hey, restrain yourself. Ha! Zhang Yingying raised her head in a daze and saw Luo Nan frown. He extended his hand to point at her. Your consumption is a bit large. It doesn't have any restraining mechanism. Mind your own business. Though she said this, Zhang Yingying still controlled herself for a bit. A bit. Zhang Yingying had every reason to be excited. After the initial shock and chaotic period, she was now the one who single-handedly cultivated sand demon number 33. Petri dish. Her current sense of accomplishment was brimming. But on the other hand, it was just as Luo Nan said. Sand demon number 33 didn't have any restraining mechanism. Zhang Yingying couldn't control anything other than the energy supply. It seemed to have its own goal. After bypassing the sandpit, it advanced all the way to the front of the beach. It crawled further and further, as if it wanted to crawl all the way into the sea. Zhang Yingying was a bit uncertain. She raised her head and asked Luo Nan, "What is it doing?" Luo Nan didn't answer. Even his lecture was interrupted. He just stared at the writing on the blackboard near him. It was as if he had entered a long examination. Perhaps he wanted to obtain an answer from it? Zhang Yingying was a bit flustered. She unconsciously raised her voice. Even you don't know? Only then did Luo Nan come back to his senses. What? Zhang Yingying laughed in anger. She pointed at sand demon number 33, which was about to flow into the sea. Did you create this to let it go into the sea? Oh, it's most likely incapable of doing so. Before Luo Nan's voice could fade away, a fine wave pushed along the front of the beach, smearing the coastal beach into a dark brown color. A portion of the wave just so happened to reach that position. It made brief contact with Sand Demon number 33. In the next second, Sand Demon number 33's body shrunk by a size. Aya. Zhang Yingying was so shocked that she stood up. As a human battery, she immediately sensed that Sand Demon 33's energy requirement had dropped, which meant that its overall active structure had weakened. It was shaved by the waves. Sand Demon number 33 showed its sluggish side. It stood there in a daze without any follow-up reactions. Zhang Yingying stomped her feet anxiously. She wanted to rush over, but Luo Nan took a step forward and reached out to grab her. Objective. Guessed my ass. Let me go. Even if you do you know how to get it back? Quack. Are you sure you won't cut it in half if you reach out? There's a pile of sand over there. _NH_NH. Then what should we do? Luo Nan went. And replied cautiously. How about we first observe? Oh no. His chest had suffered a heavy blow from Zhang Yingying. He could feel the cold aura of the white rainbow in front of him. They were separated by 2 layers of skin. Luckily, Sand Demon number 33 finally reacted at this time. It began to crawl once more, and its direction was clear. It was heading in the opposite direction of the shoreline. The next wave chased after it, but it missed by a hair. Yeah. Zhang Yingying waved her arms and cheered. Well done. Calm down. Luo Nan felt that Zhang Yingying had sunken a bit. This wasn't good. But it was useless to say anything right now. He wasn't even the focal point. Zhang Yingying had forgotten herself. She completely treated Sand Demon number 33 as the main character of the live broadcast. The camera followed it from beginning to end, not deviating from it in the slightest. Sand Demon number 33 worked hard. It seemed that it had finally discovered the fatal threat of the sea. It began its journey of escape, moving farther and farther away from the sea. It didn't look back. However, it didn't turn back the way it came in a rush. Instead, it moved at an obtuse angle and vaguely headed in Luo Nan's direction. Frankly speaking, its speed wasn't slow. Zhang Yingying estimated that the length of this fellow's body was changing between 20 to 30 centimeters. And the distance it flowed per second was a bit longer than its body length. And it seemed to be continuously increasing. This speed was approximately 100 meters per hour? It's already surpassed most ants. Not bad. Zhang Yingying also noticed that Sand Demon number 33 seemed to have naturally extended a new mechanism as it moved forward. Its moist body possessed a certain amount of tension. It seemed to be endlessly absorbing and gathering more fine sand in the area it passed through in order to expand its body size. It probably needed to replenish itself after being shaved by the sea. Zhang Yingying was already used to using a life perspective to think about it. But then again, Sand Demon number 33's behavior was a bit like its many predecessors that had died tragic deaths. It was rather worrying. But soon, Sand Demon number 33 proved that there was a certain reason why it was able to resist the cruel Luo clan screening, and survive until now. When its body size expanded, it affected the rhythm and speed of its wriggling. In other words, when it reached a certain saturated state, its fat body would produce a slight repulsive force. The effect of unifying its body was like a layer of isolation membrane. It made it hard for the fine sand in the area it passed through to adhere to it no matter what. In the beginning, Sand Demon number 33 didn't seem to be aware of this. It continued to increase the frequency of its activity. Even the tumbling motion of this fat body increased by several times. It was clear that it hoped to continue increasing its body size. However, it rolled over and over again, rolled over and lost again. Zhang Yingying watched and watched. Then she burst into laughter. Her previous worries vanished like smoke in thin air. This bro was really stupid to the point of crying. Could it be that it was able to live until now because of its stupidity? Many people in the live broadcast audience had the same reaction as Zhang Yingying. But Luo Nan didn't laugh. He even nodded in the end. Its desired driving end has already taken shape and has begun to display its effects. But it receives the protection of the basic structure end. It's the same as eating and vomiting at the same time. It won't suffer from indigestion or excessive obesity. Currently, it has developed both ends, and it has realized two-way interference. It's a very healthy mode. Zhang Yingying smirked. If you say it's healthy, then it's healthy. But what about its IQ? Your request is a bit excessive. Luonen finally laughed. His gaze swept over a few more times. It's hard to say for its IQ. Its experience seems to be accumulating and taking shape. Just as he spoke, Sand Demon number 33 seemed to have truly learned a few lessons from its many failures. The meaningless tumbling of its flowing fat body clearly lessened. Its forward speed slowed, and soon it came to a complete stop. There was still a distance of 2 to 3 meters between it and Luonan right now. It stayed in its original spot like this, but its body actually collapsed. It inexplicably began to flatten out, extending in all directions. The relatively stable core mass began to flatten out, nearly merging into one with the slightly undulating surface of the beach. Zhang Yingying was completely unable to understand. What's wrong? Is it so depressed that it's lying on the ground? Don't add drama to it. It's still an internal drama. Depression is an extremely advanced psychological mechanism. It doesn't have this material foundation yet. Luonen maintained a calm and bored state of research. He casually added a portion of content to the blackboard that was already unbearably crowded. It's sensing. It's receiving more information. You should be able to sense more energy consumption. Yep, it's an active sensing mode. It's similar to reaching out and touching. Of course, it's probing out grains of sand. This is already a type of ability. Its configuration transformation structure is like this. Luonen gave a few simple explanations, but Zhang Yingying wasn't interested in any of this. I just want to know, what will it do next? When the desired drive takes form, it will possess the ability to act autonomously. All of its actions will start from the perspective of survival and reproduction. Of course, we didn't add in the hereditary factor when we set up the rules. Therefore, its actions are easier to guess. Survival? Zhang Yingying seemed to understand something. Obtaining energy? It looks quite like it. So I suggest that you don't feed it too much. This is a very crucial period of growth. If it forms a habit of being lazy and gluttonous during this period, it won't be easy to change it. Zhang Yingying gave Luonen a hygiene ball for free. But then she gritted her teeth and controlled the amount of energy she poured into Sand Demon number 33 to the initial standard. Sand Demon number 33 collapsed more and more. It simply looked as if all the water in its body would seep into the sand. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. Zhang Yingying couldn't help but worry. Is there really no problem? Its configuration transformation is orderly and orderly. And this is also a kind of energy-saving state. At the same time, it's increasing its contact with the external environment. What do you mean? It obtains information and makes a response. Then it sees which response has the most substantial effect. It can obtain more positive feedback. In other words, it can be simply said that it's making a judgment. Zhang Yingying was shocked. Does this stupid bro really have a brain? Your way of speaking is far too loose. It absolutely can't reach the level of a highly intelligent life form. However, your perspective of observation is also problematic. You can't directly regard this pile of sand as an individual, just because it has a unified behavior pattern. In the end, it is still a kind of accumulation of tens of millions of special sand particles acting on each other. Perhaps it would be more appropriate to view it as a hive of bees, a nest of ants, a flock of birds, or a school of fish. Or perhaps it's between a colony and an individual. Luonan blinked. This is the special quality of a super configuration. Please, don't lecture me. Zhang Yingying raised her hand to beg for forgiveness. What I mean is that it's pitifully simple as a whole response pattern. It can only do what you saw at the beginning. If you view this as one, then one is one. There are no other possibilities. Luonan pointed at the symptom floating in midair as he spoke to this point. But if you take this one and split it into even finer and simpler patterns, as long as the simple patterns that are split out still possess the meaning of configuration, then one is 1,000, and one is 10,000. And if they are able to possess an efficient and common method of communication between them, then the combined configuration patterns between them will be innumerable. The innumerable combined configuration patterns will bring about endless possibilities. The possibilities rapidly expand and accumulate. Inconceivable characteristics will emerge from within them when the magical probabilities display their effects. Yes, this is precisely the importance of symptom. Chapter 971. Zhang Yingying felt that she had missed too much during her philosophy class, her theology class, or when Luo Nan was giving his all in teaching. She suppressed her doubts towards her own intelligence and tried to integrate Luo Nan's explanation. She once again seriously and carefully observed the single and infinite mode of sand demon number 33. She didn't know if it was an illusion, but when she focused her gaze on the pile of sand that was dehydrated and almost couldn't be seen clearly, the top layer of sand, which had the outline of sand demon number 33 on it, seemed to have moved. It was like a camouflage cloth. It trembled and shifted in the direction of the sea breeze. Its speed was at least 3 times slower than its normal state, but it possessed a subtle sense of rhythm. Luo Nan nodded his evaluation. It seems that it understands its current situation quite well. Are you saying that it's very smart? I can only say that it's very sensitive. Luo Nan indicated for Zhang Yingying's camera to follow. He gave sand demon number 33 a close-up view of the area it had stayed in before. Look here. The sand particles on the surface have actually been blessed. But right now their basic configurations have collapsed. They can be considered dead. Zhang Yingying moved her feet to follow behind sand demon number 33. She faced the camera, wishing that she could stick her own eyes in. But she really couldn't distinguish the difference between these fine white sand particles. The death of these sand particles is not meaningless. Through death, they send a certain kind of information to their surviving companions. What? Zhang Yingying's eyes widened innocently. She lost the courage to even inquire further. Forget it. Whatever you say, Professor Luo. Fortunately, Luo Nan began to condense water vapor at this time. He used the configuration method to express his explanation. This way, I have even more reason to not understand. Alright, Zhang Yingying actually understood a bit. Luo Nan's main idea was that sand demon number 33 was an accumulation of sand particles. The individuals within its community were currently attempting to survive in a state of low energy supply. Since they were born from energy configurations, the first choice they made to survive in a state of low energy supply was to reduce the consumption of energy from their bodies. They needed to do subtraction for themselves, to get rid of unnecessary consumption structures. They sought a balance between the double red lines of survival and conservation. In other words, they were cutting themselves. After a few cuts, those that could still preserve their basic structure and functionality would be left behind. The rest would naturally be finished. The thousands of individuals of sand demon number 33 were eliminated internally in such a simple yet tragic way. There was no need to talk about the ones who were eliminated. The ones who succeeded had to pass on the experience of their success to the entire tribe through a highly efficient mechanism. That's so complicated, it's like a configuration designer. And you're saying that they don't have brains? You were the first to question them. Luo Nan played it down and changed the topic in an instant. But I still want to say this. This has nothing to do with the brain. It's just a sort of superposition of sensing. Yes. At most, it's the efficiency of sensing. And these are not things that it learned in a short period of time after coming out of the pit. I have already talked about this. Of course not. Zhang Yingying questioned instinctively. I really did. It's just that before sand demon number 33 was formed in the sandpit, the dozen or so aggregates in the internal competition stage had gone through at least 40 to 50 rounds of similar screening. All the sensing efficiencies that couldn't keep up were eliminated completely. Actually, after sand demon number 20, This sort of mechanism has already been embedded into the basic configuration. It can be considered an artificial selection inheritance. Afterwards, it's just endlessly strengthened. Look, the relevant configuration records are still floating over there. Luonan extended his hand to point at a certain area behind the sandpit. The series of diagrams there had already piled up into a large maze. Just a glance was enough to make Zhang Yingying dizzy. Zhang Yingying was a bit stupid. She turned the camera for the first time, letting herself face the global audience. Is there really such a thing? People knew very well that Zhang Yingying couldn't see it, but there were quite a few people who fiercely nodded from all over the world. In the end, Zhang Yingying received some feedback from her circle of friends. But they were all extremely negative things like, I'm crying from being stupid. I've lost face to the entire world, and there was even pregnancy makes you stupid for 3 years. Bah, I've been working hard to raise them. You did quite a bit of work when I was raising them. Luonan squinted his eyes and laughed, sowing good karma, reaping good results. Enough. You're already being weird. Now you're putting on the posture of a charlatan. Are you preparing to establish a religion? Zhang Yingying's mentality was about to collapse. She wasn't prepared to get to the bottom of things. She just wanted to speak frankly. Just tell me clearly what Stupid Sand is going to do next. Stupid Sand? Uh-huh. My son is Stupid Sand. Zhang Yingying simply smashed the broken jar. She answered boldly and confidently. I'm going to raise it. Of course, I have to give it a name. It's quite fitting, right? I think that you get to the point. Luonan put his hands on his hips. He moved his head to 2 different positions, but he felt that it was not the right place. In the end, he could only smile helplessly and bitterly. Okay. I'm guessing that Sand Demon number 33, Stupid Sand's correct behavior has changed direction. It should be because it knows that simply seeking size is meaningless to it. It needs to pursue something more practical. Zhang Yingying raised her eyebrows. She confirmed the conclusion she had already reached before. Energy. It's energy. The current Sand Demon. Fine, Stupid Sand's behavior target and the corresponding sensing configuration change were already extremely clear. Luonan added a few simple strokes on the blackboard and explained. You are currently its only energy provider, and you are relatively stable most of the time. You can be considered a fixed quantity. However, its sensing mode is becoming more and more complex. It clearly needs more and more energy to be ingested. This forms an energy gap, and this leads to its desire. Who is it leading to? Me. In a certain sense, you, or perhaps your energy provider, is already a part of Stupid Sand's system. Moreover, you are the part with the lowest efficiency in sensing and mutation. According to its behavior pattern, it won't waste its effort on this. Zhang Yingying's camera continued to track Stupid Sand's movement trajectory. She made a random guess. Then it's you. It went around? Stupid Sand had practically spread out into a thin layer in the camera. It seemed to be riding a relatively strong sea breeze. Its entire body spun in a whirl as it went around Luonan's heel. It practically didn't make contact at all. Yeah, maybe it's afraid. After all, I've always existed as a strong interference force. You're adding drama to it. Inner drama. Zhang Yingying immediately caught on to Luonan's words. She gave him a taste of his own medicine. Luonan's reasoning was ample. Fear is a very basic reaction. It is possible to develop a similar avoidance mechanism after the desire side and the experience side are in embryonic form. Especially now. Stupid Sand's internal mechanism is already very complex. We can only decipher a portion of the clear veins. Most of it is hidden within the chaos. Perhaps it's just a flash of inspiration. We can find a relatively stable structural carrier and store it for a long period of time. Who knows? This requires a more detailed reduction and segmentation. Zhang Yingying's eyebrows shot up. Segmentation? You're going to cut it off later? This is follow-up research. It's so stupid, yet you still want to cut it off. Where's the logic? Don't even think about it. I said that this is my son. I'm going to raise it. Zhang Yingying's attitude was resolute and decisive. There was no room for discussion. Luo Nen was tongue-tied. Just as this little dispute was taking place, the extremely lowly dumb sand could not understand the debate that was happening above its head, which involved its or their life and death. It only followed its established behavior pattern, and slowly moved forward in an energy-saving state, even borrowing the push of the sea breeze. Where in the world does it want to go? Herman suddenly raised this question within the video conference. It's not just now. It tried to head into the sea before. It only turned back after suffering injuries. If what Luo Nan said is true, what method does it use? Or what method does it hope to use to obtain energy? Raising this question proved that Herman was listening very seriously. He had his own thoughts. However, not everyone was interested in this sort of technical question that involved supernatural powers. More people were concerned about the more direct question of investment returns. A certain representative immediately shot back in anger. Come on, Mr. Herman. Are we having a meeting today just to let people mock our ignorance in the field of scientific research? Yeah. Even though I'm a professional researcher, I don't have any intention of mocking you. Bald Jeff straightforwardly and fearlessly inserted himself into the dispute. He ignored the peculiar gazes cast at him from all sides, and directly proceeded with the next round of operations. Only half a second passed before the scene of the solemn video conference suddenly changed. The sea breeze, the beach, the thin mist, and the fine waves were like a classical oil painting. The light and shadow pattern that was infinitely close to reality was projected before everyone's eyes. And soon, the participants discovered that all the scenery before their eyes moved according to their own natural rhythms. Not to mention the 20 or 30 familiar faces on the beach. They stood and walked, displaying a familiar scene. Herman temporarily forgot to quarrel with others. He was a bit pleasantly surprised. Zeolite Beach's virtual reality? Zhang Yingying probably can't support the materials needed for this kind of reality, with just a single shot. That's right. All the participants had entered the virtual reality created from the live broadcast. It was as if they had traversed thousands, or even tens of thousands of kilometers to arrive at the focal point of Zeolite Beach. They themselves transformed into incorporeal souls and seeped into it. Aside from being unable to get too close and directly touch it, everything seemed to be real. Of course, the materials for one seat aren't enough. However, Luo Nan's required experimental equipment has already passed by more than one wave. The people on the periphery are all bored to death. Also, drones have already piled up in the air above Zeolite Beach. Thank God the Blood Flame Order didn't shoot them down. However, a mid-air collision could happen at any time. Bald Jeff displayed a control ability that far exceeded his predecessors by 100 times. He was able to play different tricks with the same technical explanation service. He didn't create this virtual reality just to enhance the perception of the participants. He wanted to improve it by another level. In the next second, a halo similar to an AR effect was cast onto the body of Sand Demon number 33. Which seemed to be wrapped in the sea breeze as it moved forward. Oh, now it was called Stupid Sand. At the same time, there was a dotted line that extended forward from the halo. It crossed a distance of around 10 meters, and arrived at the nearly forgotten former focal point area. I can answer your question right now, Mr. Herman. This monster's destination is right there. It's a place that we've already lost control of. Chapter 972. Why over there? On the beach, even Zhang Yingying, who was completely focused on her son, could feel the rising clamor on the beach. She furrowed her brows and swept her gaze towards the sky, but in the end, she still landed on the core issue. Previously, Luo Nan had just marked out the most likely route for the stupid sand. It pointed straight at the largest gathering area on the beach, the scene where Shershinha and the other burners were struggling to adapt. Luo Nan explained, the initial design of the Sand Demon's basic configuration was done in reference to the standard. Between open systems, similar structures will form a certain echo. And right now in this area, the energy with the most radioactivity is over there. The feeling is quite intimate. Is that so? Zhang Yingying felt that Luo Nan's explanation was a bit crude compared to before, but she soon found a point that required more attention. Intimate? Is it as intimate as me, its mother? Of course not. But it can't always suck milk. Hey. Luo Nan's chatting skills needed to improve, but his judgment was always trustworthy. Reality was just as Luo Nan said. The stupid sand was riding the sea breeze, sticking close to the ground as it headed towards that location. It even began to change its form midway. It changed from its energy-saving state to its normal state. It once again transformed into a flowing fat snake. Its speed increased explosively by 3 times. Luo Nan gave a simple evaluation of this. It's hungry. As the distance between the two sides gradually closed, Zhang Yingying's lens began to widen, encompassing an even more comprehensive scene. Many of the live broadcast viewers suddenly remembered. So there was a group of people on Zeolite Beach. That's right. Wasn't this the reason why they fell into the pit earlier? Yep, that side doesn't seem to be in a sorry state anymore. Speaking of which, Zhang Yingying was to blame. This amateur broadcast host wasn't very competent. All of her scenes were focused on Luo Nan in the middle and later stages of the broadcast. She was either focused on Luo Nan or her own biological son. She completely cast Shixinhe and the others to one side. Luo Nan's natural collapse experiment alone took up over an hour during this period of blank time. The vast majority of the audience followed Luo Nan's train of thought, climbing up and down in the configuration world. Shixinhe, Huda, and the others were in a corner that everyone had forgotten. They were carrying out arduous, high-intensity adaptability team-building activities. A scholar is better off 3 times. In any case, Luo Nan had to look at them with new eyes. You've improved a lot. Zhang Yingying, who was distracted, could see the changes over there. Of course, she was judging from the orderly state of the sand ball, floating in the middle of the circle. Yes, what a waste. There's really no cure for your brain. Zhang Yingying was still brooding over Luo Nan's thoughts of wanting to cut up her biological son, at the drop of a hat. She seized the opportunity to retort. Luo Nan just laughed. He didn't speak. He had his reasons for saying that. The sandball that Luo Nan had gifted to Shixinhe and the others was absolutely not just a demonstration product. It was actually a normative model of the 4-end, 4-layer structure in the super configuration theory. Every detail inside and outside the flowing sphere was actually a product of high generalization. Luo Nan didn't have high expectations for the precision of Shixinhe and the others' control when he gave it to them. He didn't have any requests. But looking at the situation, these burners were accustomed to the rigorous and prescriptive constraints of the dynamo core. Even if their life energy temporarily broke away from the constraints of the dynamo core, they were highly sensitive to the corresponding operating rules that originated from the same source when they used them in a broader domain. They didn't need anyone to supervise them. The constraints and operation of the sandball model naturally became the iron law that anchored their minds. Slight deviations and misalignments could be temporarily hidden from the senses of one person, but they were bound to be corrected by the collective senses of the 7 people. And so this team-building activity unknowingly became a positive feedback loop. It became a positive feedback loop where individuals constantly made mistakes, and the group constantly corrected them. The individual level increased, and the precision of correction increased accordingly. Aside from using the sandball as a reference, the dazzling light trajectories outside their bodies had returned to their natural state. If one didn't look carefully now, they wouldn't be able to see them. This proved that their control abilities had been effectively improved. Luo Nan's evaluation of this as a waste didn't mean that he regretted giving away the model. Instead, it was that this group of people had gotten a bit too carried away in the end. The positive feedback loop formed was so tight that the second wave, third wave, and even later wave of experimental equipment that had arrived in succession following orders from various parties were unable to find any leeway to intervene. More and more people gathered on the beach, but they could only be reduced to spectators, or scouts. This sort of rhythm couldn't be considered efficient. Luo Nan noticed this situation, and began to consider how to get the later equipment to join in as soon as possible. Yes, Stupid Sand's actions were actually quite a good opportunity. Right now, Stupid Sand, that fat snake, had already wriggled to the periphery of the team-building activities circle under the continuous effects of its hunger. It clearly lacked understanding of the more complex characteristics of energy activities. It didn't feel any difference between the inside and outside of the circle at all. It smoothly flowed inside. Screech. The glowing phenomenon, which had already disappeared, suddenly appeared like electric arcs that suddenly flashed between electric lines. One end came from a floating segmento on the periphery of the circle. The other end came from a curve and ended at Stupid Sand's body. Sand and dust flew everywhere. There seemed to be several levels of weak electric fire flickering in the middle. It crackled loudly. Zhang Yingying's cry of surprise was suppressed by an intense gasp. She subconsciously grabbed Luo Nan's arm. Fortunately, Luo Nan's reaction was quick. He temporarily increased the intensity of the local area. Otherwise, she might have been crushed. It's fine. It's fine. How can it be fine? I saw it explode. Are you sure it wasn't me? Speaking of which, you're still supplying energy. Is that so? Do you remember? I said not to consider it as a simple one. It's a 1 or a 10,000. It's a group super configuration system. In fact, its system attribute is more dominant than the physical attribute. You have the time to lecture me. My son got struck again. Luo Nan didn't say anything. He simply grabbed Zhang Yingying's hand to prevent her from being hot-headed and directly charging forward. This little girl was normally quite clever. Could it be that being in a petri dish for a long time had the effect of stimulating oxytocin? Right now, Shishinha, Huda, and the others all discovered that a foreign object had invaded their increasingly clear and stable domain. And it was a never-before-seen monster. The 7 people had different levels of ability, but they were all military elites. It was impossible for them to be easily affected by this little thing that posed almost zero threat, even though it was very inexplicable and very strange. Why didn't it explode? Similar thoughts flowed through the hearts of the 7 people, both overtly and covertly. Right now they didn't have the slightest doubt that this invisible domain, which had bypassed the control of the dynamo core, was the formatted space. The 7 people worked together to set it up. As their mutual tacit understanding increased, the domain gradually stabilized. The psychic pressure within the domain continued to rise. Even though they weren't wearing armor and weren't connected to the Deep Blue Walker's energy boxes, the burners were able to flatten the sandy beach by relying on their own life energy. It was so flat that it seemed to have undergone hardening. And when Stupid Sand rashly intruded, the pressure within the domain was unbalanced, causing the psychic pressure to explode in an instant. The highly concentrated format of fire had already formed an effect similar to that of a plasma bullet. In the end, the format of fire hacked at Stupid Sand's body, but its body only shrank a little bit and raised a bit of sand and dust. Stupid Sand's head was dizzy, but it didn't reduce the speed of its advance by much. Even Shishinha and Huda, who were meticulous in their thinking, were at a loss. Huda cast a few glances at Stupid Sand. He didn't know whether or not it was his misconception, but when the format of fire struck the monster's body, there seemed to be a repulsive force. There seemed to be some sort of melting effect. It was like using all of one's strength to smash a stick into sticky mud. It seriously lacked the feeling of striking. Switch positions. Shishinha, who acted as the temporary main force, took the initiative to issue orders. His sensitivity towards the details of the format of fire couldn't compare to Huda's, but he was very clear that this little monster was related to Luo Nan's follow-up experiment. He absolutely didn't dare to mess with it. He couldn't afford to provoke it, but he could always hide. Huda glanced at Stupid Sand again, but he didn't raise any objections. The 7 people relied on their explosively increased tacit understanding. They didn't need to make any careful arrangements. Their feet shifted together, and they pulled apart the distance between them and Stupid Sand with a few steps. During this time, Huda added another suggestion. How about we go to the workstation? The so-called workstation referred to the Deep Blue Walker exoskeleton armor that stood towering on the seaside. Luo Nan had already made arrangements before. Their final goal was to combine forces to drive this thing and achieve the required standards for the experiment. If it was an hour ago, when they could only heat each other and act as tungsten wires, they really wouldn't have the courage to do this. But now, their confidence had increased substantially along with their tacit understanding and control. When Huda mentioned it, practically everyone was itching to give it a try. Shershinha was relatively calm. This was because according to common sense, he should be the one to enter the cockpit in the end. He should be the one to verify whether or not the experiment was successful. There's still a difference in the number of people we have. The chief said that the more the better. It's here again. Forget it. Just pretend I didn't say anything. From the perspective of a normal person, the current stupid sand in the form of a fat snake really looked like an iron simpleton. After entering the formatted domain of the group of 7, it had clearly been rejected. It short-circuited wherever it went. It was hacked at least 3 or 4 times, but it actually persevered and didn't give up. It wholeheartedly charged forward. Shershinha and the others shifted positions, pulling apart the distance between them. This fellow stayed dizzy in place for a few seconds. It was unknown what channel it used to capture information, but it continued to press forward once more. It was just that its judgment wasn't that accurate. It flowed and crawled for almost half a minute, charging a distance of 2 meters. In the end, its direction was completely wrong. It began to flip up and down, going around in place. This caused quite a few of the live broadcast viewers to be shocked. Chapter 973. Dumb Sand finally came to a realization amidst the explosive laughter that resounded throughout the world. It began to painstakingly correct its position, but it was useless most of the time. This continued until it used its trump card, alternating between the fat snake and the thin membrane state a few times. Only then did its accuracy increase. Even though it was crooked, it was still able to find a general direction. But if Shershinha and the others were to shift their positions a few more times, this iron fool would most likely not be able to find his way north. Shershinha and the others were indeed prepared to do this. But at this time, nearly 2 hours later, Luo Nan's order descended upon their heads once more. You guys. 2 more people. The order was just a reminder to Shershinha's group of 7. Their true target was the new batch of equipment that came later. The 20 to 30 burners had been idle behind the beach for a long time. They came from a variety of sources, including the military, corporations, laboratories, and so on. But the 2 hours of sentry duty was enough for them to cultivate a certain level of tacit understanding. The group of people had a simple discussion, and 2 people walked out from the front. They slowly walked over to the incorporeal domain on the beach. Most of these people had their own channels to help them interpret and analyze the situation during the 2 hours they had been watching from the sidelines. Not too long ago, Dumb Sand had even personally explained the situation to them. It was better than nothing. So when they strode forward, they were prepared both physically and mentally. The problem was that the mass of these 2 burners was much larger than Dumb Sand. Correspondingly, when they stepped into the circle, the recoil force of Shershinha and the others' positive feedback loop was much stronger. Arcs of light snaked through the air of Zeolite Beach once more. They were blazing and malevolent, and they headed straight for the heads of the 2 people who had just entered the circle. Even though the first batch of the group of 7 already had experience and had done some control beforehand, the 2 people still entered a rigid state in an instant. They didn't seem to be much more brilliant than the iron fool that was flowing in a crooked manner. In every sense of the word, it was as if the 2 of them had been electrified, and they perfectly replicated the tungsten filament state that Shershinha and the others had 2 hours ago. At the same time, the balance was broken, and Shershinha and the others also had an abnormal discharge. To make matters worse, the sandball model that had almost been perfected was twisted again. On the other side, the intense energy radiating might have given Dumb Sand a clearer direction, causing this little thing to become excited again. Its speed increased explosively, and it completely corrected its direction, heading towards the shining land, and even towards the sandball model floating in the center, heading straight for it. Luo Nan saw everything with his eyes. Then he issued another order. Every 5 minutes, 2 more will enter, and so on. In an instant, under the dazzling light on the beach, almost everyone's forehead was covered in sweat. What happened on Zeolite Beach after that was more like a comical comedy for most of the viewers who were watching the live broadcast. Stupid sand, the tyrant body that was always clumsy and iron-headed, but occasionally brilliant and had an immortal body. It was a bunch of experimental equipment that kept increasing, to the point that they swayed and returned to being clumsy. And the chase between the two could be said to be absurd. To put it simply, the group of people was upside down, and the monster was crooked and twisted. There were all sorts of electric arcs and light effects interspersed in the middle, and dust was scattered. It was clamorous and chaotic to the extreme. Many people in various regions of the world were already going crazy with laughter. But there were still many people who were unable to laugh. For example, the group of ghosts that were using high technology and high consumption methods to gather on Zeolite Beach. Right now, the conditions for these capitalists and their trusted representatives to watch the live broadcast were becoming more and more in place. Aside from personally watching the scene in the form of ghosts, the visual effects of the data they received on the scene had already reached the pinnacle. Within the formatting domain of the current focus, the originally incorporeal domain now displayed a relatively complete coverage before their eyes, as well as a portion of the key structure of the system. It was direct and clear. They could select any participant to understand the basic information, and the power they belonged to, and the level of role these people played in the current domain, the ups and downs of their state, and the quality of their performance were all displayed in a dynamic manner. They could see it with a single glance. Even the iron fool that crawled all over the place in the domain had quite detailed observation data attached to it. This included the calculation of its body length, volume, and weight, the amount of lightning it had to bear each time it was struck by lightning, the subsequent losses, the state of repair, and so on. Of course, this also included the predicted path of the two's pursuit. It was quite accurate. When faced with this sort of scene where the real and the false were combined, people would naturally have the confidence to control everything. However, these elites who were used to rolling about in the sea of business understood one thing very well. Behind gorgeous diagrams and data, there were often holes that couldn't be filled with normal expressions. Then again, Baldy Jeff didn't have any intention of hiding it. At most, he carried a bit of a lack of sincerity. It clearly isn't a very good forager. It has already been blinded by greed. Was this a denial? Not a single person could hear anything like this. This was because Baldy Jeff was simply using the standard of evaluating life to apply to this strange creation that had no head or tail, was muddled and faceless, and only possessed a limited number of reaction modes. No one present was an idiot. They could all see that Luo Nen was currently weary of dealing with Mother Zhang, who was secreting an excess of oxytocin. The two were tangled together, and there was no explanation for dumb sand at all. There was no control to speak of. But it was in this sort of uncontrolled state that dumb sand displayed its truest and most reliable performance and movement, including perception, reaction, and related goals. This series of actions could be called slow and stupid. But the problem was that people could more or less discover, feel, and even understand the internal logic within. The immediate and intuitive data attached to it was the most obvious evidence. Of course, there were always contrarians everywhere. It's just artificial intelligence. And I can see that it's a path of deep learning. It's just that it's been packaged with extraordinary power, and catalyzed a bit. Catalyzed a bit? You know that it's deep learning. Then you should be very clear on how much data is needed for a useful AI to be immersed in. How much training time is needed? Please. Transfer learning is the foundation, okay? Even Luo Nen admits that he cheated. Is it that hard to transfer a neural network in advance? What about a carrier? Or do you think that this pile of sand is actually a chip? Oh right. The silicon content is quite high. You also know that a carrier is needed? Then explain to me. What level of material support is needed to turn a pile of sand into an artificial intelligence? An astronomical amount of computing power. Of course, an astronomical amount of energy consumption. Where does all of this come from? Did it fall from the sky? That's why this is a groundbreaking result. If he really did place a supercomputer next to him, and if he buried a nuclear reactor in the sea, what are we fighting for? Groundbreaking cannot subvert the laws of physics. Extraordinaries aren't gods. Hey, you have quite the bearing of a researcher. Then why don't you explain the era of distortion? Explain the extraordinary power. Explain the extraordinaries who aren't gods. Or maybe you can discuss it with them face to face. The specters found it hard to interfere with reality for the time being. Under the catalysis of a series of inducements, a few people began to make a racket. Moreover, they were affected by the current deep problem. All of them copied half-baked theoretical concepts. You chattered and I pecked. Chicken feathers flew everywhere. At the same time, there were people who tried to sort out the threads of thought and find a more realistic solution. As the youngest person in the conference, Herman's ability to receive and digest information was quite outstanding. He worked hard to sort out his thoughts and asked their technical guide, Jeff, what do you think is the greatest threat to us from what Luonen has demonstrated so far? To be more precise, what do you think is the greatest threat to our investments? Investment isn't my area of expertise, Mr. Herman. Bald Jeff pointed at his shiny skull. I can only bring up problems that I find hard to explain and deal with as a reference. Is that okay? Of course. Bald Jeff extended 2 fingers. There are 2 problems. The first is an old problem. How did Luonen connect different authorizations and different versions of the dynamo core's regulations together? We can guess that those damned syncopators played a crucial role. We can even dig out a few so-called superconfiguration structures. We can try to repeat the experiment. But there's one thing. What's the threshold for using the syncopators? After all, the current intelligence shows that the cost of this toy is very low. Herman laughed bitterly. Jeff, I feel that your attainments in investment are quite okay. There was no doubt that Bald Jeff's words had hit the sore spot in the hearts of everyone present. For a product, the most fatal thing was never the intergenerational competition of technology within the existing framework. Instead, it was the substitution of new things that transcended the existing framework. Think about it. A group of syncopators could be easily controlled by humans. They could fly up and down, soar freely. They could send the implanted dynamo core, which required powerful technical support, into the trash in a matter of minutes. Quite a few people felt their blood pressure soar when they thought about this scene in their minds. Some people sought to comfort themselves. People like Luonan, who can easily control objects with their thoughts. Even among the psychic ability users, there are very few of them, right? Indeed, there are very few of them. However, I just received some information from the Bitter Reef Laboratory in T-City. Bald Jeff snapped his fingers. In the virtual reality, a certain syncopator floating on the beach suddenly disassembled into many different components, forming a set of very intuitive 3D component drawings. After disassembling this little toy, we can draw a basic conclusion. In its initial design, a portion of space was reserved for a control chip to be loaded in. If you make do with it, a miniature maglev motor is also possible. Even if it doesn't work, the distribution of special materials in a special force field isn't a problem that's hard to solve. Jeff didn't directly say the answer, but everyone present understood what he was implying. Simple threshold control really wasn't much. Someone pressed his forehead. The ghost group that gathered here fell into a stagnant silence. However, Bald Jeff still had another question. Second, why didn't that sand demon die? Chapter 974. What? Many people didn't understand the meaning behind Jeff's words. Facing most of the specters, who were at a loss, Jeff turned his hand back and added an emphasis effect to the stupid sand on the beach. I mean, this seemingly stupid thing is clearly just a pile of sand. Its structure is loose, and it doesn't have any strength or toughness to speak of. But why is it able to carry the continuous output of the format of fire, and still move freely after entering the format space? Gentlemen, do you have an answer? No one responded immediately. Some people were still pondering over the deeper meaning behind Jeff's words, but there were also people with stronger comprehension, such as the youngest Mr. Herman. He thought hard, and with a flash of inspiration, he went around the bend and blurted out, "It's a threat." Jeff raised his eyebrows and added another word. "An extremely great threat." At this moment, the stupid sand that Jeff had highlighted was still crawling back and forth in a frightening manner, jumping back and forth between the normal beach and the format domain supported by a group of burners. But there was no doubt that most of the time, it played the role of a disruptor, adding to the chaos of the constantly adding new people, seriously imbalanced, and extremely busy experimental equipment. At the same time, it also endured the rejection and bombardment of the format domain. For the vast majority of the audience, due to the joyous atmosphere on the zeolite beach, it was very difficult for them to associate the flashing electric arcs in the air with lethality. But in the visual image in front of these high-level participants, every blow suffered by the stupid sand was estimated, labeled, and compared. Bald Jeff made a simple conversion of these values and expressed it in a way that was easier to understand. In the past 20 minutes, this sand demon suffered 46 format fire attacks, the smallest of which was less than 100 joules. Let's filter this out and find a higher standard, more than 4,000 joules, about the standard of 1 gram. How about that? The participants basically had the relevant knowledge, and they knew that this had already exceeded the kinetic energy of most bullets fired from large caliber rifles, and the power was already quite impressive. But after a simple filtering, there were still 39 records left on the table. Moreover, there were many that exceeded 1 to 2 orders of magnitude, and there was even a record that broke through 1,000,000 joules. Are you joking? What's the difference between this and a cannonball? It's just a high-explosive grenade, and it did make a hole back then, a shallow hole. I can't see it at all. Wait, that seems to be the problem. Among the participants, most of them were smart and conscientious people. It was just that they were affected by various disturbances, and were momentarily confused. When someone reminded him, he immediately came to his senses. At this moment, almost all the participants were horrified. Yes, that's the problem. Be it the format of space or the format of fire, they clearly did not show the destructive power they should have. Where did the energy go? Someone tried to find a counterexample. Those burners that joined later on, it's pretty much the same situation. That's right, those new members are also suffering from a similar impact, and there are no obvious signs either. But please note that the model of their suffering from the impact is completely clear. Bald Jeff snapped his fingers again, and displayed the relevant data and a simple model. From this, it can be seen that the unmanifested part of the energy gap has re-entered the internal circulation of the domain, and is almost not lost. Therefore, it is not harmful to the new members. It was an obvious injury. But here in the Sand Demons, the situation is completely different. We can calculate the explosive power of the domain, and we can estimate the bearing capacity of the surrounding environment, as well as the visible losses of the Sand Demons. However, when we subtract the two, there is still a part of the gap that we are unable to detect. If we remove the head and the tail, the missing gap is undoubtedly the Sand Demon's ability to bear and absorb energy. Alright, Luonan said it in a joking manner, but we can't treat it as a joke. The Sand Demon easily took it. The gap it created is not easy at all for the format of space, which is to say, for the theoretical and technological system of the domain of space. Herman couldn't help but scratch his scalp. Is it very troublesome? The gap created by the Sand Demon's digestion is something that our current theoretical framework and calculation model are unable to deduce. Bald Jeff's answer was extremely simple, but it made people's hearts ache. Moreover, this wasn't the end. We also need to know that destructive power is merely the most superficial layer of this system. It is a complex system that involves a high degree of interference and influence between the mental and the material. The problem that has been revealed so far is still unknown to the entire system. Of course, the situation might not be as bad as I've described it to be. There will be a series of new discoveries in the follow-up research process that will make up for and fill in the gaps. However, the current situation is like this. Gentlemen, this is the problem that we have discovered and urgently need to solve. That's all. Silence followed by silence. The group of specters in the virtual reality world didn't speak at all. They were all evaluating in their minds or simply calming themselves down. Only after a full 10 seconds did Herman make a simple conclusion. If I understand correctly, Jeff, what you're saying is that this fellow Luo Nen not only created a new product that could possibly replace the dynamo core, but he also created an extremely targeted cracking tool. That sand demon. That stupid fellow. His existence can effectively counter the archetype format's theoretical and technological system? Bald Jeff's expression didn't change. His smile was like a fake shell. The results of our current observations are: the effectiveness of the format domain is clearly reduced on the sand demon. Herman's chest tightened again. He found it hard to continue for a while. However, a drowning man would always randomly pull himself up. Herman's gaze swept around randomly in an attempt to find inspiration. In the end, he really did manage to hook onto something. No, Jeff. Things might not be as bad as you say. Look, this virtual reality world that you guys created is really amazing. Even though Luo Nen created everything in front of us, I'm thinking that he might not be able to fully grasp the various kinds of information flowing in here, because this is our own accumulation. Bald Jeff raised his eyebrows. And then, the information you guys control is getting richer and richer. You're fully following up on the entire situation. Your predictions are accurate. It looks like the relevant models are already in place. I'm not talking about the format space. I'm talking about that thing. Herman pointed at the focal point on the beach. Can you guys also create that thing? Jeff looked at where Herman's finger was pointing and immediately laughed. His laugh was strange. You're talking about the sand demon? That's right. Herman gradually straightened out his train of thought regarding the convergence of soul light. His finger turned and pointed at sea-gazing youth at the end of the beach. I feel that this fellow has already explained in great detail regarding the cultivation of the sand demon. The direction is also very clear. With Deep Blue and Tianqi's technological accumulation, and Mr. Li Wei's ability, we can imitate him and rapidly reverse engineer the entire system. Can't we do it? I remember Luo Nan saying that this is ultimately a matter of probability. Our accumulation in artificial intelligence is quite considerable. Even if our methods aren't as wild as his, as long as we're willing to invest resources, we should be able to produce a result by burning it. The more Herman spoke, the more reliable he felt. He gradually became excited. If we can really burn a sand demon out, then some problems can be easily solved. At the very least, it can become an imaginary enemy. Through the conflict with the format space, it can push back the flaws in our research and make improvements. Perhaps we can use this to turn a crisis into an opportunity and take a large step forward. He heavily slammed his fist against his palm. His entire train of thought was thoroughly connected. All he needed was applause. Everything you said is correct, Mr. Herman. Bald Jeff maintained his smile and slowly nodded. He spoke words of agreement, but there weren't any ups and downs. There was a lack of resonance between his emotions. There are no problems with your words on a macro level. I'm even thinking that Luo Nan probably had this aspect in mind when he conducted such a crazy demonstration experiment. He's also researching a few specific problems. But there's one thing. Luo Nan has hidden it very well from beginning to end. Most people, including you, haven't discovered it. Herman frowned. What's he hiding? It's the gourd that you mentioned. The gourd that we need to earnestly imitate. It's still hidden deep within Professor Luo's skull. He's never taken it out. Baldy Jeff casually clicked and selected all of the words that Luo Nan had written on the blackboard for the past 3 hours. These words made one's eyes dizzy and made one's heart explode with high-level information. They lit up one after another in the virtual reality environment, and were arranged according to the order in which they appeared. They looked much more orderly, and soon attracted the gazes of the other participants. It's a very outstanding blackboard writing. It's a very complete process. It's a very detailed calculation. Right? But I must say that this is nothing more than a child's toy. Herman gasped. Didn't he display every step of the experiment? He only displayed different levels of standard answers as well as the conventional logical connections between the answers. He told you that you can deduce the next answer from this answer. He even displayed the concrete steps and graphical models. It looked very beautiful, very deep, and very real, right? But this is just a facade, Mr. Herman. Look at this sand demon. We predicted its behavior very accurately. It's as if we grasped everything about it. But did you know that we used the ant colony algorithm that was invented in the last century? We did a simple simulation calculation. Why is it like this? Because the typical appearance of this idiot's movements is that it's highly attuned to the natural ant colony. But is it an ant colony? Or is it a set of sensors? Or is it just pure virtual data? In the end, it only displays an approximate projection in our experience and logical system. It conforms to our common sense and basic logic, making us believe that we understand and grasp it. But what is its essence? No one knows. What's the point of this? We don't need standard answers and phenomenal projections. What we need is Luo Nan's core thinking to deduce an answer from random results. A complete system that can support this miracle. But on this point, that guy is so tight-lipped. Or perhaps his thinking is on a completely different level from ours. Chapter 975. It seemed that Baldy Jeff's true mood wasn't too good under his calm and natural expression. His voice and the speed of his speech were increasing. Herman, who came to his side, was like a target that took the initiative to come up and get scolded. Luckily, Herman's sacrifice was worth it. Baldy Jeff's mood calmed down a bit after spitting out a string of words. His gaze swept across the specters in the virtual reality world, and his tone became a bit gentler. What a gentleman said just now was quite correct. An artificial intelligence of the same level, from breeding to production, requires an enormous amount of material and data. This is a price that must be paid in the rules of our cognition. If we can't see supercomputers, special power transmission lines, and power plants by Luo Nan's side, then we need to find a matching replacement that can withstand comparison and measurement. Of course, it can be a completely new, revolutionary system. If Luo Nan really takes out these things, then as a researcher, I might prostrate myself in worship. However, the system that I prostrate myself in worship is absolutely not this one. In the end, Herman's expression wasn't too good. He forcefully replied, "Those formulas? Formulas? The vast majority of them are empirical formulas, and the repetition rate isn't even 5%. Mr. Herman, can you derive the current mathematical system of Earth from 5% of the empirical formulas in the limited field?" Herman shrugged his shoulders and went completely silent. But there were other participants who were filled with righteous indignation. According to what you said, if everything Luo Nan said is just to fool people, then why do we need to cooperate with him? Why do we need to play tacit understanding with him? Let's just announce it to the entire world and expose his tricks. Let him lose all standing and reputation. Baldy Jeff's lips twitched. Oh, I forgot to say. Empirical formulas are still formulas. Concrete applications are concrete applications. The concrete configurations that Luo Nan talked about are really useful on a practical level. For ability users, their extraordinary powers aren't that precise. Especially their conscious activities. They have a high tolerance for mistakes and strong adaptive abilities. I believe that as long as one has the guts, the effort, and a bit more luck, one can try to imitate, adjust and adapt. One can realize sufficient interference between the material and the mental. There are still some people who can use some examples in real cultivation. In this sense, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that Luo Nan's lecture today is extremely valuable. Someone couldn't help but roll his eyes. You've said everything. Since it can be used, why can't we use it to make a bet and burn the sand demon out? Once one succeeds, will the others be far behind? Sir, I understand what you mean. Of course, there's a possibility that a handful of sand will fall down and become a sand monster. Plus, Luo Nan's 2 hours of public lectures have cut off many meaningless routes for us. Is that right? The smile on Baldy Jeff's face deepened. If you bet on probability, you might succeed in 10 billion, but you might also be the first. Alright, all projects need a feasibility study report. If I were the one drafting it, I would probably write, "Please prepare to invest in another Deep Blue, okay?" The bicker was stunned for 2 seconds before he became even more displeased. "You're exaggerating." "No, it's just that I think there's something wrong with the frame of reference you've chosen. The sand demons are something that we don't understand. It's very likely to involve research on the spiritual level, so it's very difficult to make a good conversion. We'd better find a purely physical equivalent, such as the supercomputers and power plants mentioned earlier." A handful of sand flew up. The probability of becoming a supercomputer and a power plant. Have you considered it? You're quibbling. The bicker was so angry that his specter body was about to explode, but what could he do? Jeff, who came from the Deep Blue laboratory, was one of the people who had the least position to support Luo Nan. His explanation was to boost Luo Nan's ambition and extinguish his own prestige. It could only prove his impartial academic standpoint. And Luo Nan brought heavy pressure to Deep Blue and Tianqi. Herman didn't have anything else to say. He let out a low curse. He wasn't targeting anyone. He was just venting his emotions. However, a sharp voice suddenly rose up from a location a bit further away. "Kill him." The entire Spectre community suddenly went silent, allowing this extremely low-pitched howl to spread out even more. It reverberated back and forth, causing ripples in everyone's hearts. The person who spoke first felt that he had lost his composure a bit. He did his best to make up for it. He clearly didn't release any goodwill. You can imagine what he'll do next. We need to prepare for the worst. Once he said that, quite a number of people agreed with him. Yes, we need to set up a fuse mechanism. The simplest method, the most straightforward method, is the method with the least losses. We don't reject this line of thought. Perhaps we can continue to perfect it. If we can find a reliable executor, perhaps I'll vote for it. They were a group of red-eyed gamblers. Herman steadied his hand. He didn't say anything at this stage. He looked at these specters with cold eyes. They were doing their best to create a sense of social interaction with a premeditated murder. It must be said that Herman's head was quite high before. His anxious state had lasted for nearly 3 hours. But it could be said that this was a poison and a cure. He heard the emotional shouts and saw these losers who had clearly lost their composure. An indescribable sense of comfort and superiority spontaneously arose from the bottom of his heart, helping him to slowly calm down. Herman was able to understand the mentality of the participants. After a long period of investment, the distant bloodline project aside, the Deep Blue project had already reached its payback period. Especially with the support of the Deep Blue platform, the military's counterattack in the wilderness had achieved victory after victory. Such battle results helped them crazily attract customers from the military and megacorporations. They watched as the Deep Blue platform and the corresponding burner modification model practically became the absolute standard, sweeping the entire global market. Many of these people had already invested large sums of money many years in advance. They gambled on the layout of related industries. Who would just step on one side if they could earn money from two things? Luo Nan suddenly appeared at this time, forcefully breaking the vigorous momentum of the Deep Blue project. He even launched a damned substitute product, directly shaking the foundation of the Deep Blue project. Think about it. At the beginning of today's live broadcast, quite a few people still held the thought of borrowing strength to fight strength. They wanted to give pressure to the two laboratories, Deep Blue and Tianqi. Of course, they wanted to give pressure to teacher Li Wei. But Luo Nan was good. He directly smashed the house down. His actions were extremely intense. It was hard for anyone to remain calm when faced with him. Didn't that fellow say that he was carrying out a diplomatic operation? Was he going to burn down trillions of dollars in diplomacy? Or was he going to completely abandon the capital circle and specialize in the military and political system? This was far too willful. If Luo Nan was truly a pure researcher, he would really dare to play like this. He would be crushed to death if he said he was a once-in-a-thousand-years genius. His grandfather was a good example. But the problem was that Luo Nan wasn't. Right now Luo Nan had the qualifications to be willful. Luo Nan was clearly being unreasonable. Didn't an opponent like Herman have to rack his brains to find a reasonable explanation? Herman's mind was rich with activity. The more he thought, the more ridiculous and laughable it was. But in a certain sense, the more he thought, the more he understood. He wasn't just blindly pondering in his mind. He had already exchanged opinions with Wang Yu in private before. She had also raised a suggestion. His understanding wasn't too clear when he was intoxicated before. But now it was different. According to Wang Yu's suggestion, Herman's gaze anchored to a person. Director Mao. This extraordinary life form that stood at the apex of human evolution hadn't spoken for a long time. His behavior was extremely unsociable. Right now he was strolling by himself on the beach. He held a conjured coffee cup that didn't quite fit the scene. He gazed at the seashore. The end of his gaze was Luo Nan. Right now, Luo Nan had disrupted the situation and pacified the woman. He appeared to be completely uninvolved in the matter. He crossed his arms and faced the surging tide and mist of the sea. The chain of gazes and attention made Herman realize something. There was no need for him to make blind guesses about what Luo Nan was considering. But from what he understood, Director Mao's gaze might contain contemplation, interest and balance, but he couldn't see any particularly extreme emotions. And so, Herman had a clear idea of what was going on. True big shots who were related to benefits and had the ability to execute were all like this. Why did he need to forcefully stick his head out? In this matter, the old man at home was the one who was anxious. He was young. He had a lot of time. Why did he need to do this? There was also Wang Yu. That truly slippery fellow. He needed to go back and exchange information with her. Only then could he make a final judgment. Herman's mind calmed down, and his mind became clearer. A few thoughts came in a torrent, but they sank and filtered. He suddenly felt that something was wrong, but he couldn't pinpoint where the problem was. Someone suddenly spoke up not too far from his side at this time. And this person raised his hand very politely. "I want to ask, Dr. Jeff, where's the fake goods?" This speech was extremely incompatible with the current atmosphere filled with killing intent. It jumped around too much, so much so that most people didn't understand what was going on. The person who raised his hand continued to raise his hand, making himself even more conspicuous. "I'm saying that we should take reference from that sand demon. No matter what method or system we use, we should only make something with similar functions. Even if it's just for show, what should we do? With Deep Blue and Tianqi's accumulations, can't we even make something that looks good?" Something that looks good? Bald Jeff turned his gaze and recognized the person who had spoken. He couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. In reality, this person was quite easy to recognize. He had a tonnage that exceeded that of an ordinary person, a fluffy and lush beard, and a shiny skull that seemed to have come from the same assembly line as Jeff. He looked to be in the prime of his life, but his identity more or less contradicted his appearance. He was the senior representative of the LCRF's elderly group at this conference. Of course, his other identity was even more subtle. Jeff didn't point it out. He just maintained a smile on his face. "I don't quite understand what you mean, Mr. Barty." You're tuning in to the Echoes of the Heart YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.